The rain that had looked like mercy in the night clung to the stone by morning, delicate beads losing their grip, slipping down the red walls to darken the mortar between them. Dawn came as a grudging smear of pearl over Blackwater Bay, then a ribbon of pale fire, sliding under low cloud. From the upper walk of the Red Keep, where the wind climbed the steps before the men did, Eddard Stark watched the city come awake, by layers. First the gulls, then the chimneys at the Hook, then the chatter of the fishwives, when the wharf carts began to rattle. He fitted gloved fingers to the parapet's wet crenel, and breathed salt, smoke, and something sweetly rotten, the city's old perfume. He did not love King's Landing, but he knew it now, the way a man comes to know a scar. He knew the hour when the Goldcloaks changed shifts, because the watch got louder at the same time every morning. A fatigue made of boots. He knew which bell at the Great Septet had the hairline crack that let it hum a fraction of a tone mournful. He knew the pattern of wind along this particular wall. He'd walked it enough nights to have taught the wind his name. It lifted his hair now, still more gray than he'd remembered when Catelyn twisted a braid and called it winter's thread. He had not seen Catelyn in 64 days. He had counted each as a hedge against forgetting. The door behind him sighed and closed. The familiar slight weighted limping of Davos Seaworth's stride followed. Ned did not turn at once. He watched a black barge take the river's slow bend, watched a pair of boys tilt an empty fish basket between them and blur their laughter with the rain. "You make it up here earlier every week, my lord," Davos said. He kept 2 paces back, as if the edge itself were a form of lordship to which he was not heir. "The wind clears my thoughts." "In that case you'll have them clean as a sept this morning," Davos said, tilting his chin to the rain. "There's a smell over the bay like thunder that can't decide upon itself." Ned nodded. "Storms are honest things. The city has made a habit of dishonesty dressed in perfume." He let that sit between them like a third man. Then he turned. Davos' beard held points of water like a net holds minnows. "You have word." The outer piers loaded an hour before dawn. Grain from Rosby and Stokeworth went into the city granaries with more order than I expected, and less waste than the harbor rats would prefer. "Your man Bywater does not like being liked, but he's competent." "Then, Jacelyn Bywater is Tyrion's man," Ned said. "As often as not, that's the same as saying he's the city's man, which I will take for now." He looked past Davos to the door. "And there's the rub. For now. For now is the only oath men ever keep," Davos said. "And the only one, a sea, will honor. You should break your fast." "And now." "I already have." Ned's mouth remembered a sour apple and a hard heel of yesterday's bread. "We have a council in an hour." He could have said tri-council. The name had come from a merchant's letter, then a vintner's guild petition, then up from the small folk, until even the courtiers used it with the insulting ease they reserved for anything new. He would not give it more weight by speaking it. Names belonged to time. Arrangements belonged to men. Men had a habit of starving or killing those. "We'll be ready," Davos said. He sounded as if he bound the words with tar. Lord Stannis was awake before dawn. I saw the candle under his door still bright at the hour I went to the piers. He writes in a sailor's hand. It thumps like a fist upon a table. "A king's hand?" Ned said, very mild. Davos' mouth moved around the title like something slightly too hot. A king's hand then." And the dwarf slept late, though I suppose he did not so much sleep as drown in wine. He came to the yard when I did, with ink on his fingers, and shouted at a man for stacking crates in a manner that pleased no one but the rats. I told him he'd make a decent quartermaster if he grew a foot. "And so?" Ned found the ghost of a smile. "He grew 10 feet once last week, in some gossipmonger's telling. He was a giant in a brothel, as I recall." "I wasn't invited to measure," Davos said deadpan. He moved his weight as if he'd stand there all morning, then shifted like he recalled he had legs. "There's trouble in the streets near the Iron Gate. Fist fights yesterday between the king's men and what folk call Lannister gold, though I dare say half those coins began their lives in Bravos. Bywater says he can keep the peace, if peace can be had." "And no." "Peace will come if we fold it at the right angle," Ned said. "There are lines one can crease into men that make them obey their shapes." He looked again at the wet city. at the palace layers stacked like history. And there are lines one folds just once, and they are broken forever. Davos, who had lost 4 fingers to Stannis' law, and gained 7 sons by Stannis' mercy, nodded to both truths at once. I'll see to the piers again after the council. Send the smaller cogs to Duskendale for salt cod, Ned said, sudden tato. Tell the fishermen the crown will buy at fair price for the city. If we keep them in coin now, they won't take the Ironborns when it comes. When it comes, the sea does not choose a new shape because men give it a new name, Ned murmured. Balon Greyjoy hasn't forgotten his last rebellion. When his old grief aches, he looks for something to lift. He will choose a crown to lift, sooner than a cup. Davos made a face at the taste of the future in his mouth, and departed without another word. Ned watched the city a heartbeat longer, and let rain touch his eyelids until cold gathered there. He had a habit, since the day the blade did not fall, of seeking sensation at the edges of things. Rain on lashes, a knife's weight against a thumb, the exact scratch of a quill. He'd lived through the moment where sound narrowed to the line of a sword, and it had left him with the superstition that detail could be armor. When the small, true things were kept, the great false things could do less harm. He made his way down. The passage to the council chamber tasted of lime wash and old smoke, a combination that never quite left the Red Keep. Servants nodded to him in the manner they had learned in these 2 months, neither sycophancy nor cold. It was strange how quickly a building could learn. New guards stood at the door to the chamber in breastplates, scrubbed to a dull dignity, rather than a shout. They were not pretty men, which suited him. He had asked for the ugly competent ones, and Bywater had smiled that clean, humorless smile, and delivered. Stannis Baratheon was already in his chair when Ned entered. Calling it a chair was generous. It was a carved thing with a back like a ship's prow. No furniture had ever looked less comfortable, which may have been why Stannis had liked it at once. He was dressed simply in dark wool, lined with fur at the neck, an austerity that might have seemed a pose, if not for the way it sat on him like skin. He did not stand, but he did nod, twice, as if there were 2 men in Ned to receive the gesture. Stark, he said, by way of greeting and inventory. Your Grace, Ned said. He had decided to use the title in private without quarrel. If the law mattered, titles were among the law's visible stones, and Stannis had clung to the lawful stones when everyone else ran for the rubble for weapons. The realm needed stones. They might have sat there counting each other's breathing, if the door had not opened again. Tyrion Lannister entered with a speed that suggested he had not slept late after all, or not slept at all, and had enjoyed it. His hair was wet at the ends and combed with a short sword's impatience. He wore a doublet of black and red too fine by half for mourning, which meant it was meant to be seen. The only jewels upon him were ink and a pair of amused eyes. He climbed his cushion like a man fording an old stream and leaned his elbows on the table with the proprietary ease of a cat spreading on a windowsill. Good morning, he said, and pulled a folded parchment from his sleeve. I bring news. None of it bad enough to be interesting. I prefer dull news, Stannis said. I know you do, Tyrion said. If you were news, you would be a charter. Rosby has sent full wagons and a half. Stokeworth sent half wagons full. The difference you may assign to the courage of their reeves or the poverty of their barns, as you like. Varys tells me, may we pretend to be surprised? That Littlefinger has a cousin by marriage attached to Stokeworth's counting house, who now owns a new span of orchard. He did not yesterday. I don't know if we are meant to applaud his industry or arrest him. Then? Both, Ned said. Arrest the cousin. Leave Petyr Baelish with his orchards and his wit. Men with too many leaves make their own shade. You continue to underestimate the man, Stannis said, as if he might be listing wind speeds. I continue to figure him correctly for a man of tolerable vices and intolerable virtues, Ned said. He thought of a finger on his chest, a promise of help, offered like a sweet fruit with a worm in it. Remove his hands from the purse strings, and he will find a new game quick enough. For now he has nowhere to run that won't require him to explain how he ran. Keep him where we can see him, and his jokes become less funny. Tyrion warmed his hands at this, as if at a hearth. I admire so much in you, Lord Stark, that I almost resent your jokes when they happen to be good. He flattened the parchment. The Iron Bank has replied, in the hand of one Tycho Nestoris, with an appetizing lack of courtesy. They would like their money, and if they cannot have it, they would like the respect of honest men who admit they cannot. I propose we give them the latter until we can give them the former. I intend to send him a ledger that contains the truth and a bottle of arbor gold that does not. Men believe in books and drink alike when both are heavy. Then, send both, Stannis said, and send a schedule. We owe the debt. We will pay it. If we live long enough not to die of other things first, Tyrion said. Yes, our survival remains a necessary condition of our fiscal prudence. On which note, the watch beat 3 men last night in the Street of Looms for shouting Joffrey's name. One of them shouted Cersei's as well, and exactly where she could plant it. I trust you will applaud the watch's restraint in diminishing the man's teeth by only half. Enderol. Ned folded his hands and saw Sansa's face the last afternoon he'd watched her braid her hair in that southern fashion that made her look like the daughter of another man. The city has too much of Joffrey's memory to chew and too few teeth to do it with. The first will diminish. Order can supply the second. I'm very fond of order, Tyrion said. It keeps one from having to improvise dignity. He tilted his head. Speaking of dignity, I have the paper we discussed. The one making explicit that the king's justice is neither the king's whim nor the king's wife's. Would you like to sign, Your Grace, and thus make yourself slightly less dangerous? Stannis took the parchment. He did not read quickly, but he did not skip. The way his eyes moved told Ned that he did the unfashionable thing and read every word like it had once cost someone ink and time, and ought to be treated with a soldier's respect. When he had finished, he signed with the same harsh stroke he would have used to carve a mast with a knife. If my justice is seen to be law rather than desire, Stannis said, then men will endure it. If it is seen to be whim, they will rightly fear the day my desires chain. Which they never do, Tyrion said, pleased. Stannis' eyes did not admit the existence of the jest. He did not look at Tyrion so much as measure the air above him. We must speak of Renly. The name lay on the table like a coin of a foreign mint. Tyrion lifted an eyebrow. Ned watched the rain press a new beaded path down the window. Renly is at Bitterbridge with enough banners to make a market of the road, Stannis said. The Tyrell stand behind him with their usual green confidence, and the Reach behind them with its usual ability to grow more of everything than it needs. Renly stands in front of them, Tyrion corrected. Your brother likes standing in front of people. It makes him visible, and it ensures they can't see the people who ought to be visible. Such as you. He is a usurper, Stannis said, with the patient violence of a man defining the word. Wall to a child, and he's my brother. These facts are not contradictory, though they are unpleasant in combination. Then Sao. Ned thought of Catelyn telling him once, long ago in a Winterfell spring, that all families were the first governments men learned, the first treaties and betrayals, that a lord who did not understand the rule of his own house could not rule anything. He did not say this to Stannis. It was a woman's thought given by a woman he missed in the voice of a man. Stannis would not heed. We can propose a great council, he said instead. A lawful assembly to ratify succession and reduce the quarrel to a question of obedience to an old practice. Invite lords great and small. Make Renly choose whether he respects the custom he denies. Renly will come if he can make it a stage, Tyrion said. Which he can. The trouble with true things is that they make excellent pageants. Stannis' mouth thinned until it was something a cartwheel might have made on his face. A great council is a concession I do not favor. The law is not subject to the votes of men. No, Ned said. But men are subject to the votes of men, whether we prefer it or no. If you appear to submit your right to the scrutiny of others, and the right survives the scrutiny, your right will be stronger. If you refuse, those who prefer pageants to laws will tell themselves that you fear them. I fear no one, Stannis said. I mistrust everyone. That will keep you alive longer than the reverse, Tyrion said. But it will not keep the city fed. I support Lord Stark's notion of a great council provided we control the tables and the ink. Let us invite and let us count who attends and how. Let us make the rules such that, Playing them benefits the man who respects rules most. Stannis held still long enough that the candle flame beside him forgot to move. We will speak with Maester Pylos about precedents and forms. And we will send a letter to Renly that states he will be heard. If he declines to come, then the realm will see what manner of king runs from hearing. Good, Tyrion said. And while we are making gestures of grace, let us decide Cersei's fate in terms that appear generous to anyone who does not count the sharp edges. Ned's hands tightened on each other until his right thumb shook slightly against his left knuckle. He allowed the tremor. It was honest. She remains in the Maiden Vault. She remains under guard and under the law. I have no wish to make a spectacle of her. I also have no wish ever to be in the same city as the woman again. Stannis did not blink at hatred. He understood it in others as he understood it in himself, a force like winter. She will be tried. When the council convenes, a trial before the assembled lords makes murder less difficult for any of them later. It makes it law. Until then she is a prisoner, and she will be fed as a noble prisoner is fed, not as a rat is. Joffrey will remain under guard in the sept, in the care of the High Septon. Let him learn a text that is not a dagger. That's beautifully put, Tyrion said, only half mocking. Then he sobered with a quick tilt of the head, hawk to cat. Send Myrcella to Dorne. Stannis' look could have snapped a mast again. You propose to give them a hostage. I propose to give them cause to prefer our realm unburned, Tyrion said. The wine smoothed from his voice now. Something old and Lannister and counting showing. Doran Martell can hold a grudge for 20 years and a promise for longer. He does not want to fight. He wants to remember. Give him something pleasant to remember. We can speak of betrothal if that does not sicken you beyond speech. Tommen is a sweet boy. He will like lemon cakes and warmth. My sister will fume, which is balm to my soul. The city will whisper that the three of us have long arms, and we will have one less little lion underfoot to be taught to bite. Then? Ned closed his eyes a moment and saw Myrcella, who had once dropped a handkerchief and flinched as if a hand had been raised to her. I have no quarrel with the girl, he said, and felt the old ache where his sense of justice had rubbed bone. I have quarrels more numerous than bread loaves with the house that made her and the mother who taught her. But I have no quarrel with the girl. I will not see her harmed. Then so. Stannis' finger rapped the table twice, an impatient gavel. Dorne keeps treaties like old women keep herbs. They may not use them often, but they are comforted by the smell. Send the girl with an escort to SunSpear, and write that she is offered to the princesses keeping with respect. I will sign it. I will not promise any marriage yet. Not yet, Tyrion agreed, his eyes brightening as if from within. Later, you can pretend to relent after stern resistance, and make generosity of inevitability. We are done, Stannis said suddenly, as if the hour had become a thing to be dismissed. Lord Stark, send your letters north. I will not have your son marching simply because he likes marching. Robb likes the truth, Ned said softly. I will send him letters he can hold like a plank in a flood. He rose. He had once imagined what it would be to stand from a table as a king stood, simply because he had decided to stand. It was not much different as it turned out. Standing was standing, and men would do what they had decided whether a crown had weighed upon the deciding or no. He bowed to Stannis and inclined his head to Tyrion, and the door's iron sang again in its jamb. He did not go to his chambers. He went to the sept first. The great sept of Baelor smelled of stone and old incense, which is to say it smelled of memory. Candles multiplied themselves in the mirrors, and the polished marble made his boots echo like a man with two shadows. The mother's statue, mild as a winter sky when the sun hides and means no harm, watched with the same absence of judgment she had worn the day he had thought he would die. Sansa stood beneath that gaze, her head bowed. She wore gray wool now without the southern embroidery that had once sprung from the sleeves like a hedge. Her hair was done simply. She looked older in this simplicity, which was a harm the city did to girls. She turned when he was halfway to her. Her face lifted like a bird's, quick and cautious. Father. His name in her mouth was a door he had feared might lock forever. He put his hands on her shoulders and found them thinner than his memory had allotted. And he wanted to press life back into her by sheer will. "I have been in council." "I know," she said. "Sir Robb told me when the bells stopped. The bells sound different now. They were ringing out the hour. They used to ring out men when they were put on spikes," she said in the same even voice. "The bells remember, even if we ask them not to." He had no answer for bells. "We are sending Myrcella to Dorne," he said instead, and watched her eyes do the arithmetic. "She will be safer there than here." Sansa's hands made and unmade a small fist that might have later become a stitch. "Will I go north?" "You will go north," he said. He did not add when. The when was a creature they were still taming with scraps. "And Arya will go with you." "Have you found her?" Sansa's voice cracked there. Finally, a tree letting a branch break under snow. Yes. He had not seen Arya in 10 days. She had come back to the Red Keep with a split lip, and a story about a baker's boy and a friend who was not a friend, and had slept like an animal under a bed, in a servant's room, until one of Jory's men had found her. He thought of Syrio Forel. It was possible men like Syrio died every day, and only the city bothered to count. She is safe. She is angry with me, which I will forgive as often as she gives me cause to. That will be often, Sansa said, and for an instant her smile sounded like Winterfell before morning. I am angry with you too. That will be often, he echoed, and her mouth quirked in spite of them both. I would send you this afternoon, but it seems I cannot do anything once without it rearranging the city. Their arrangements. Robb must be told, and the road must be made safe. He did not say the word Frey, as if it were a beetle. You will have an escort, and you will have a winter cloak, and you will have your sister, and you will go home to your mother. Sansa nodded. Her hands had found each other and held on. I prayed. I know. I prayed for you. I know. He did not say that if the mother had ears for any prayer in this city, they were surely Sansa's. His own would have been lost somewhere under the floor with the dead. He looked up at the statue's stone hand and thought that mercy was not a quality so much as a bridge built between two places one did not expect to touch. He had never expected to stand here again. When he left the sept, the rain had broken into a thin, hard light. The city looked like someone had washed it and forgotten to dry it. He walked toward the Tower of the Hand with his guard 2 paces behind him, and the old ache in his leg counting the stairs for him. In his chamber, a raven waited. Maester Pylos had written a neat script that did not pretend to be more elegant than it was. Robb Stark, Warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell. The words felt like a brace on a broken bone. He took up a quill, then set it down, then took it up again. He wrote to his son as a lord must, and as a father must, and each hand tempered the other. The law required forms. He wrote them. The heart required truth. He wrote that too. He wrote of the city as one writes of weather to men who have never seen the sea. He wrote of Stannis as a man of law, who wanted to make himself a law, and of Tyrion as a man who could make weather of a candle. He wrote of Sansa and Arya, and of Catelyn's name as if writing it made it a cord he could pull upon to draw her closer down the river. He wrote of Theon, and here his pen slowed and flattened. He told Robb what he always told Robb, that Theon was a ward and a friend and a hostage, and that all 3 truths must be held at once if a man did not wish to break his own neck. He sealed it with the wolf, and sat with it, while the wax cooled, and the raven clicked its beak twice, impatient with the small businesses of men. When he rang for the bird, Bywater himself came with a soldier's quiet. Lord Stark, who is on watch at the iron gate? Ned asked as he handed the missive. Bywater's hands were needle-marked, in a way that had nothing to do with mending clothes. The man had an old injury healed to work with rope, not silk. Conwy and Harker. Conwy does not like his wife, which is good for his attention. Harker loves his son, which is good for his temper. Now, good, Ned said. Replace them at noon with men who are bored by the city. Bored men are less likely to take bribes, but send one man who has not yet decided whether he is loyal to you or the coin you give him. Bywater looked as if he would enjoy saying that he did not keep such men. He settled for a thin nod. Yes, my lord. And thank you for yesterday. Bywater's face was mostly eyes and jaw. It did not move much. The watch keeps order when order benefits the men who keep it. My men have been told that their pay survives only if the city does. That argument convinces more quickly than virtue. And now? Then keep making it, Ned said. He watched Bywater leave and thought of men like him. Men who built a thing because they could lift the stones, not because they liked living in houses. In the afternoon, he walked the yard. Arya was there with a blunted practice sword and a furious attention. She did not look up when he came, which either meant she had chosen not to, or that she did not know how to be a girl and a lord's daughter and a survivor all at once. She was sparring with a boy of 12 who moved well with bad habits. When Arya slipped under his guard and tapped him twice on the ribs and once on the thigh, the boy's eyes flared with anger and shame, and he swung too hard and hit air. Arya punished his air. Enough, Ned said after a time. Arya looked at him in a way that measured him, as if he were a wall she might climb. Her hair had grown, which meant she had not let it be tended as anyone wished. You said I could practice. I say many things, he said. It keeps men guessing. Come, Daw. He walked the perimeter, and Arya walked beside him with the straight shoulder of a soldier and the impatience of a cat. We are leaving the capital soon. Good. You will apologize to Septa Mordane before we go. She died, Arya said without inflection, and punched a hole in his plan as easily as a child breaks a crust on a frozen puddle. He had known, but to hear it from Arya's mouth returned it to the world in a fresh cut. He nodded and let the silence acknowledge a woman who had been brave in the way Northerners recognized, but did not applaud. Then we will bring her name north, he said, and we will say it where men do not use the word. Septa, as a jest. Arya's mouth twisted. I want to bring a sword north. You will bring a sword north because there will be men who do not understand any other language, Ned said. But you will also bring words and mercy and caution. You will never swing at air, because air is a thing that always wins if you tire yourself against it. He felt her looking at him then, as if she had been told a rule she did not want and might one day obey anyway when it saved her life. Can I have needle? Yes, he said, though the yes was treacherous to everything he had ever said about daughters and swords. You may have needle. He did not tell her yet that he would have Sirio's name carved somewhere no one in this city could whore or polish it away. That evening, as light went down the sky like a cloak slipping from a shoulder, they stood at the end of the east dock to watch the Dornish galley take the river. The ship was low and long, and made for coasts warmer than these, and carried a name he could not pronounce without making the M sound like the start of a prayer. Myrcella stood upon the deck with a cloak of pale yellow, which was either someone's notion of kindness or someone's notion of insult, and she held herself like a cup set where it would not spill. Sir Aerys Oakhart had charge of her. He looked as if honor were a chain he had chosen and liked the weight of. 2 sandship captains stood near him, their dark hair braided as if it were a form of writing. The Dornishmen did not bow when the royal party on the quay lifted their hands. They touched their fingers to their hearts and to their throats, which was a bow of sorts if one knew how to read it. Sansa stood to Ned's left. Tyrion stood to his right, muffled and dry-eyed, and Stannis stood beyond that with nothing about him that admitted the existence of weather. The small folk had come to watch a girl depart who had never meant much to them and would never return to take their bread away or to give them any. They watched with the collective attention of those who understand they are looking at a symbol and do not yet know whether the symbol means safety or appetite. Dornish ships sail as if they care whether the sea respects them. Tyrion said mildly, men who drink wine that tastes of sun. Stannis said, as if that were a suspicious habit. They drink their wine the way you drink your judgments, Tyrion said, in equal measure and with no gratitude. Ned's eyes stayed on the girl. Myrcella did not cry, at least not where anyone could pretend to see. She looked at the city with a care that might have been love or hatred, or simply a child's need to memorize a thing in order to own it as a story later. When the ropes were cast off, she looked for a moment like a figurehead cut from flesh. Then the galley heeled, and the wind made a simple truth of everything. and the godswood of the ship's mast whispered, and the distance began its work. "She'll be safe there," Sansa said in a voice that wanted to be sure. "She will be safer," Ned said. "Safe is a story we tell children to make them sleep." "You never told us that story," Sansa said. "I did," he said. "I told it to you in the words I had then, that I would come back. I did not think to teach you that sometimes safe is the word for what does not happen to us that happens to other people. The city will not teach you that kindly. I would rather it did not teach you at all." The galley moved into the broader river and then into the bay, and the gulls gave it commentary. Someone began to sing a Dornish song on deck, the sort of song that sounds like it is about lemons and is about sex and sovereignty. The small folk murmured and then dispersed, pulling the evening back around their shoulders. Stannis turned and left without the appearance of haste or of patience. Tyrion lingered. "We did a good thing," he said, as if confessing a personal distaste he had decided to outweigh. "Sending her. We did the least evil available," Ned said. Tyrion's mouth did that small cornered smile that made his face look for an instant like a child's and for an instant like an old man's. "I prefer that. It is less poetic and therefore more likely to be true." "Dondarrion. In the morning we will hear that someone called us weak for letting a hostage go," Ned said. "In the morning someone will call us strong for making an ally," Tyrion said. "The morning is generous that way." They walked back together toward the keep. Along the way a woman sold skewers of river fish that flamed on a small brazier and had been bathed in something spicy enough to make the eyes water at a distance. Tyrion bought 2 and handed one to Ned, who tried to refuse and then did not. The flesh came away easily with the teeth and tasted of smoke and the clean oil that rises when a thing is cooked correctly. For a moment he ate and forgot. Ned slept that night as men sleep when exhausted by making a day behave. He dreamed, as he had dreamed sometimes in the wake of the near death, of snow clinging to gray stone and of Bran's laughter echoing in a stairwell, and of something else beyond the snow, a cold that did not belong to weather but to intent. At the wall, the night smelled of iron and old leather and the particular smoke that wet wood makes when men have burned down all the dry wood and have not yet received promise of more. Jon Snow stood with his hands on the walkway above the gate and looked out at the moon flattening itself behind a ragged birch stand, and felt the world narrow to 2 colors and a hunger. The letter lay under his belt like a second skin. When he'd read his father's hand, he had felt the impossible elasticity of a thing. Grief, hope, stretched to admit that it might not be what you thought. "Lord Eddard Stark lives," the letter had said without saying it. "He will send your sisters home. He will send word. He needs you to remain at your post." Jon had read those lines and then had not moved for a long time. He had not wept, because the air would have frozen tears against his face, and the indignity of that would have shamed him. He had not laughed because laughter above a frozen gate sounds like madness and invites ravens. He had felt something in his chest stand down from a years-long siege, and another thing in it take up the horns and begin another. Duty. Dight. The old word that men varnish in story and find rough as a rope in the hand when they have to pull upon it. Samwell Tarly came up beside him with a breath like the ghost of a blown-out candle. "Is it very unkind if I say, I am happy?" "No," Jon said. "Be happy. It will confuse the wall and perhaps make it crack in some new way." Sam made that small noise he made when he was not sure if he had been insulted or paid a compliment. "I don't understand the world." "Neither does the world," Jon said without malice. "That is why it keeps making weather and men. It hopes the one will learn from the other." He lifted his eyes past the birches to the black line where trees give up and snow begins in earnest. "Something's wrong out there. You always say that." "It's always true." A horn sounded from the east tower. The soft burr that meant nothing immediate and everything persistent. The Rangers were late returning. Another letter, another day. Jon put his hand on the wood of the rail and felt the wall's age under his palm, which is to say he felt his own age as an insult against it. He thought of his father's letter again and of the word, son, in it. And he let the heat of that word stand in him against a wind that came over the ice like the language of a dead king. In King's Landing, morning came with its own politics. A procession of guildmasters waited in the antechamber to the council hall, each with the seriously baffled expression of men who have brought offerings to a god, and found at the altar not a god, but a clerk. Ned sat with them. He listened to a cooper speak with eloquence about staves and tariffs, and to a vintner speak about spoiling, and to a dyer speak about water rights in a way that made it sound more interesting than it had any right to be. He asked questions that made them blink and answer as if they'd been waiting their whole lives to be treated like adults. When they left, they bowed to him with respect rather than flourish. Tyrion slid into the chamber after them, late enough to suggest he had chosen to be later than he might. "If you begin to give the small folk the habit of being heard," he said, "they will begin to make that habit a law. You are making trouble." "Good." Ned signed a small writ that would make a very large difference to the men who loaded grain at the docks. When the law is the same habit for everyone, fewer men need swords to insist upon their appetites. "You put everything in dreary prose," Tyrion mused. "And yet, sometimes it reads well." He leaned back. "Your friend the Onion Knight tells me the Blackwater has shoals that have moved. He wants to mark them and teach the pilots to go around rather than through. He tells me this will not make him popular with men who have learned every stone and love the danger as if it gives them character." "Bah. Davos loves the stones more than they do," Ned said. "He loves knowing where they are so he can pass near them and leave them to hold the sea together for men who don't respect it. I retrieve some pleasure from the thought that we have a smuggler in our employ who despises men who smuggle their courage from danger," Tyrion said. He laced his fingers. "I had a letter from my father last night. A courier arrived at the second hour with a seal that looked as if it had been bitten by a wolf and a tone that could salt beef." Ned did not flinch. "Tywin Lannister remains at Harrenhal for now. He inquires after my health. He promises it will continue if I keep the family's honor attended to. He defines honor as acquiescence to certain positions you and Lord Stannis would consider repulsive." I wrote back to thank him for his concern, and to list our recent accomplishments in the manner of a steward with nothing to hide. I omitted the bit where we tied his grandchildren to the law, rather than to the crown. "Nan. He will come to the city," Ned said. "He will come to the city when he sees whether it is worth sacking," Tyrion said evenly. "Our work is to ensure he sees a place that cannot be sacked without sacking his own purse. If he cannot see that, we will show him figures, and if he cannot see those, we will let Stannis show him soldiers." Ned nodded. He thought of Tywin Lannister's face as a coin hammered with a likeness of authority. He thought of men who believe in coin and law, not because they are just but because they like the way they fit in the hand. "I will write him too," he said. "Doe. He will resent you more if you do not, and less if you do it well." Tyrion paused. "I sometimes find I am placed in the position of apologizing for my house as one apologizes for weather. I did not make it, I do not admire it, and yet I am wet." "You have done good work," Ned said, the direct praise falling heavily in the room like a stone in a pail. "Both of you have done work I am proud to have witnessed. I do not say that to be kind. I am not kind by habit." "Bento." "I know," Tyrion said, and managed not to look moved. Janos Slynt was hanged at sunset with little attention, which is to say he was hanged lawfully. Bywater came to report that the man had watched his own death as if he were reading a document he had not been allowed to draft. Ned did not rejoice. He remembered a boy once in the north who had killed a deer out of season and had to lose a hand for it. The boy had watched his own punishment as if at a fair and later had died in a ditch for stealing bread. Some men took the law poorly, as a drink that did not suit their stomach. He slept badly. He dreamed again of snow and of the sound a weirwood's leaves make when wind learns a new word. He woke before dawn to a knock like fate and found Davos with a face made more gaunt by the lamplight. "A message," Davos said, "from Dragonstone. From the Red Woman." "I had imagined we might have a day without a Red Woman in it," Ned said, the exhaustion like sand in his eyes. Davos' mouth did not understand humor today. She saw something in her fire, a shadow on water. an antler crowned with ice. She says the river will freeze one morning in summer, and the men who laugh at that will be the ones whose mouths will be found full of it. Nemsau. Ned closed his eyes once and opened them again, and the room had not changed. That is to say that time had not been merciful. Stannis will hear this as confirmation of his own zeal. Stannis will hear this and remember that he prefers oaths to omens, Davos said, surprising him. But he will not forget it. Neither should you. I don't credit her flames, but I credit the cold. So do I, Ned said. The Old North in him had never forgotten that the wall was not a fancy, but an answer. He stood that morning in the council and read the letter aloud without ornament. Tyrion winced at the prose in places and smiled at the image of antlers, made of ice, until Stannis looked at him, and the smile went away like a thief, leaving no lasting impression but a shiver. They talked of Renly and of the Tyrells, and of what wine to send the Iron Bank with the schedule, and of what language might persuade Lord Frey to remember that his bridge was made of the realm's teeth, and that biting it would break them. Time, like the city, learned, over days that bled together like rain on stone. The Tri-Council. He would not say it aloud, but he had to say it somewhere in his head to arrange his thoughts. Did the small things that were large. They reopened the Guildhall vaults in view of the guildmasters. They made a list and a law of price for bread. They gave the watch 3 coins more a week and took from them the habit of taking gratuities. They sent for wood. They wrote to White Harbor and to Gulltown and to Tor's body's name on an island, where the currents pretend to permit entry and make a trap of it. They made daily the only piety they could afford. The day they posted the notice in the common tongue that read, "The law is a tool, not a weapon," and beneath it in smaller print that men liked, "If your lord is starving you, the king will hear it." 2 men were beaten in Flea Bottom by soldiers who did not like reading. Bywater hanged one and exiled the other to the wall. And the men who watched their own future and decided to behave. Ned took his breakfast some mornings with Varys, which is to say he endured the man and took the news he offered as a man endures leeches to relieve fever. Varys was as soft and evasive as he had ever been, and yet somehow harder now that his jokes had to do more than decorate someone else's malice. "You have made me very busy," Varys cooed. "Busy men dislike being busy, Lord Stark." "I prefer you busy to clever," Ned said. "I prefer a man's hands where I can see them." Varys looked at his hands very earnestly, as if he'd not seen them before, and smiled. "We are not yet rid of Lord Petier. He writes letters with invisible ink to men who do not know how to read, which is impressive as theater, if not as a plan. Renly plays king upon damp grass. The Tyrells grow anxious that they are not the subject of every conversation. Lady Olenna has called you sensible, and meant it as an insult. Lord Tywin moves as a mountain moves, when it recalls that moving is permitted by nature. And across the narrow sea, a girl with a handful of eggs walks east, which is the direction of old stories. Bow. "I have no time for old stories," Ned said. "You are in one," Varys said, so gently it might have been courtesy. "And you were telling it," Ned said. "Someone must," Varys said, "or else men will set to narrating themselves, and then who will mind the pauses?" He tilted his head. "I am told that your bastard son is at the wall, and that a raven from him carries language that would not embarrass a maester." "He is a good boy," Ned said. He did not elaborate on the word bastard because he had learned in this city that men loved to speak that word for him, as children love to say the name of a food that once made them sick. Winter held its own council. Renly sent a letter written in the round, confident hand of a man who was sure women like it. He declared his willingness to attend a great council, provided that the great council accepted the fact of his kingship, and convened in his camp. Stannis replied by sending him a copy of a line from a legal text and a note that said, in essence, "No do be." Tyrion proposed sending a mummer to do a play called The Man Who Brought His Own Crown to a Vote. Stannis proposed raising more men. Ned proposed sending Catelyn to speak to Renly and thought of his wife on a horse, riding toward a brother who liked festivals, and he felt both relief and terror. Catelyn came down the river with the speed care and competence give a boat. When she entered the great hall, Ned's heart lost its order and made a noise like a bird startled from a branch at night. She was thinner, and her hair held more white, and she looked exactly as she had looked the day she had seized his wrist outside the Winterfell bedchamber and said, "The capital is a pit with a pretty ribbon around it." She did not bow to Stannis when she was brought to him. She lowered her eyes and then raised them, and Stannis gave that a nod, which for a king is respect. They spoke long into the night. Catelyn's voice in a council was a river finding the shortest true path between stones. Renly was vain. The Tyrells were cautious, hungry, confident. The Reach loved its own reflection and wanted the realm to admire it. They could be brought. Eventually, if their safety and their pride could be written in the same sentence. Catelyn proposed a path. Stannis proposed a wall. Tyrion proposed a feast. Ned proposed a letter that would put the Tyrell family name next to the word gratitude, without once suborning a law. It was not eloquent, but it accounted. "My ladies," Tyrion said when they adjourned, and bowed to Catelyn and to an emptiness where he perhaps placed the Queen of Thorns as an idea. "I look forward to watching the Reach test its appetite against our menu." "Do not mistake Lady Olenna for an appetite," Catelyn said, tired and incisive. "She is a cook. She will feed others and not swallow anything herself." "I shall remember to hide the spices," Tyrion said. In the days after, the city changed in increments. The gutters ran a little clearer because men were paid a coin to clear them, and a coin honestly earned has the taste of bread in it. The brothels of the Street of Silk found themselves with fewer gold cloaks, lingering in doorways, and more men paying, which in its way was safer for the girls. A troupe of jugglers did a play in which 3 men argued about hats. The joke was poor, but the laughter was honest, which is rare enough to count. The Sept saw more candles lit for gratitude than for rage. The docks saw more rules posted for safety than punishments posted for swallowing the rule. It was not peace. It was the first shape of something like it, which is to say it was an arrangement men could believe in long enough to eat. One evening, near the end of the 2nd month, Ned stood again on the wall walk where the wind had learned his name. Far below, the bay held light on its back like a patient animal. He thought of all the men who had stood here before him, and of all the decisions they had made, that the city had digested and shacked. He had not been born to arrange capitals. He had been born to count stores in a winter that might not end. He held that in his hands and the city in his hands, and tried to keep both from dropping. He heard Tyrion before he saw him. The man's boots sounded different from other men's, a tap the stone had come to recognize. He had 2 cups in his hands and a bottle under his arm, and a smile that was not for show. "Don't tell Stannis," Tyrion said. "But sometimes wine is the law." "I will not," Ned said. He took the cup. They stood, not touching, and watched a barge slip. "Does it ever go away?" Tyrion asked after a time. "The sound of it. The one that was the last thing you expected to hear, and then did not hear." "No," Ned said. "It becomes a new kind of quiet." He sipped. The wine was not northern, but it was honest. It tasted like something a man had made with care. "I have often wondered if justice is a form of poetry," Tyrion said. "It has meter and repetition, and a way of making men recite lines they do not understand. And sometimes, it hits the ear oddly, and men pretend that means it was not eloquent." "Justice is a roof," Ned said. "Poetry is something we say under it to make the waiting bearable." "You are not always unpoetic," Tyrion said, almost fond. A bell rang, one of the smaller ones, the tone that meant messages from the river. They finished their cups and went down, and found Davos with a face like wind. "Renly moves," he said. "He moves north with the Tyrell banners. He moves at a pace that says he knows he is beautiful. He will be at Duskendale inside a fortnight if he does not stop to let ladies smell the roses he carries everywhere in his sleeves." "Good," Stannis said when he was told. "Let him come. The law will not move. If he will not bow to it, he will break his head upon it." Catelyn's mouth tightened. "And he will gather the broken pieces and make a necklace and call it love," she said softly. "We must be careful not to teach men to love breaking their heads. Then we will cushion the law with the forms of grace," Tyrion said. "Make him kneel on velvet. Men who kneel on velvet forget to resent the floor." And so they wrote. And so they sent. And so they waited. In the north, Robb Stark read his father's new letters and felt the shape of his own blood settle into something that looked like a man's future rather than a boy's temper. He dismissed the lords who wanted to ride just to see themselves upon horses. He promoted the men who mended shoes. He sent more grain and hard cheese and salted meat south than any of his counselors thought wise, and told them that the city fed now would be the North's friend later, and that the North was fond of having friends who were not winter. He went to the Godswood and stood under the carved face that had watched his father's father and his grandfather's father's father, and he told it the truth. He wanted to ride. He did not. He sent ravens. At the wall, the horn that was only one horn blew the one long note that means rangers returning, and the men who came up the slope looked like men who have seen white where white does not belong. Jon took their reports and wrote them with care, and did not tell himself stories to fill in their silences. He folded those silences into a packet with his letter to his father, and thought not for the first time that of all the dangerous luxuries men keep, certainty is the one that kills most quickly when misapplied. In King's Landing, the day of the Great Council approached with the slow intimacy of winter, making itself known in summer. Banners arrived and dressed the streets in colors that made the city look like a bawd's bed. Men who had written to accept a lawful assembly came in for the smell of it, and men who had meant to refuse came because their wives wanted to see other women's dresses. Lawyers argued precedents until the candles complained. The High Septon rubbed his ringed hands together as if piety were a goose he might pluck more from if he warmed it. The commons watched the carts of food and cheered or did not cheer. The watch, in Bywater's quiet hand, multiplied and spread like a sensible stain. On the morning of the assembly, Ned stood in the corridor outside the hall and drew breath as if he were about to plunge into cold water. Catelyn touched his arm. "Do not try to win everything," she said. "I will not," he said. "Do not try to look as if you are not trying to win everything," she said. "Stannis will do that for you." He nodded. He had the sensation of an old scar tightening in weather. When he was seated, he looked at the assembled lords and saw such a variety of human arrangements that for a moment he was struck dumb by the fact that a realm existed at all. He saw Lord Frey counting his own fingers and then counting others' banners. He saw Lord Mace Tyrell smile as if his face had been instructed to do so in a time of drought. He saw Sir Brynden Tully lean as if he were a bridge between two banks, and he saw men from White Harbor with the smell of fish about them, who had never expected to be here, and were not sure if they liked discovering they could be. He saw Renly arrive as if he had been born for arrivals. Stannis spoke first. His voice did not fill the room. It obtained it. He did not call himself anything but what the law permitted, which left enough room for men to whisper. He held out a copy of the evidence that had once threatened to take Ned's head, and now promised to give the realm one. He made his case as a ledger. Renly rose and made his as a song. Tyrion watched and smiled, and did not speak until the part where everyone begins to repeat themselves, and then he rose like a short man in a tall argument, and cut tall men to size with jokes that were not jokes. Ned spoke when necessary. He did not embroider. He did not supplicate. He did not confess a love for the city he did not have, and he did not pretend to be pleased by its attendance. By midday, tempers had warmed. By late afternoon, the hall had the smell men make when they have had too much talk and too little food. At twilight, someone shouted something about dragons, which was as sensible as shouting about summer and winter. The High Septon raised a hand. Men continued speaking as if hands had no power. The light went down by degrees and left the hall in a bronze that made everyone look temporarily heroic. When they adjourned, it was not because anyone had been persuaded of anything. It was because men can only perform their opinions so long before their bodies insist upon other needs. The city exhaled. The watch changed over. The gulls went on being gulls. Ned walked the yard in the half-dark and listened to the sound of a distant crowd that might become a riot, and did not. He thought of the law as a tent, the three of them. He, Stannis, and Tyrion held up with poles of varying conviction. He thought of how easy it would be for a wind to come and take it, and make a sail of it, and run them all into rocks. He found Stannis alone in the chamber where they kept old maps that had been both useful and wrong. Stannis stood over one showing the Blackwater before the river had shifted one of its lesser channels. He did not look up when Ned entered. "We will need to force him," Stannis said, not specifying. There was only ever one him when he spoke like that. "If Renly will not bend, he will break. Better he breaks on my knee than on the realm's neck. Better he bows in a way that looks like dancing," Ned said. "Men like to pretend they bow only to music." Stannis looked at him then with the fury of a man who resents that a truth was spoken prettily. "I will not make a show of justice." "You will make it visible," Ned said. "That is a show. Show me a law a man cannot see, and I will show you a man who thinks it does not exist." Then Derwent. Stannis turned away. For a moment, his shoulders sagged, and Ned saw the boy inside the man. The boy who had sat on a beach at Storm's End and learned what it meant to eat rats and hate the men who made it necessary. He felt something almost like pity, which is a form of attention men often misname. At that moment, a page slipped in with the face boys wear when they bring words that might arrange the evening. "Lord Hand." "Lord Stark," Ned corrected gently. "Go on." "A rider from the Roserwad," the boy said. Lord Renly's bannermen quarreled among themselves. A Knight of the Reach wore Stannis's badge in his sleeve and was called traitor by his own cousin. 2 dead, 7 wounded before men remembered where they were. Someone shouted that the law would decide these things now. The crowd cheered. Tyrion arrived as if conjured by cheering. "We are very handsome today," he said. "Let us not get used to it." Ned exhaled. He thought of the cold beyond the wall. He thought of a girl on a galley going south to a fortress built of sun. He thought of a boy in black who had decided to remain where he was asked to remain. He thought of a king who hated everything about being seen and a Lannister who loved it, and of how they held a thing between them that was larger than either could lift alone. "We will go on," he said. It was not eloquence, and it was not a plan. It was a sentence with a subject sturdy enough to walk. He repeated it in his head until he believed it. Then he went out into the yard where men were eating the bread he had promised, and where the rain hesitated and finally gave up, and he stood under a sky that had not decided upon itself and felt the first small deliberate wind of a season turn its face toward them. A.K. Night drew itself close to the red keep and made the stone honest again. Braziers threw puddles of copper light down the corridors. The long tapestries stirred where drafts crept. A subtle breathing none of the statues ever owned. Ned walked the inner ways alone by habit and by design, his guards 2 corners behind him, his hand once in a while brushing the rough wall, like a farmer running his palm along a furrow to see if the plow had bit true. He found himself before the maiden vault without intending to, or perhaps intention was simply the name. A man gives the routes he walks enough times that his feet begin to know the map better than he does. The 2 men outside the door wore the watched blackened breastplates that had been scoured with sand and salt, until they no longer reflected anything but a dull promise. Bywater had put them here. Ned trusted his choices as he trusted the form of a good tool. He took the key from the senior man and let the iron do its work in the lock. Hinges argued softly, as if they had once been taught to sing. Cersei Lannister sat where the maiden on the carved pillar could see her, if stone could see. She had a chair, a table, 2 books, a wash basin of copper, and a window that admitted the moon only in a thin slice, enough to remember it by, not enough to be comforted. She wore green and no jewels. Even the absence of gold looked like a calculated gesture upon her. When she raised her head, he saw the old expression that had so often reminded him of a falcon looking at a snare and weighing which apparatus would be hungrier. "So," she said. The syllable carried 100 knives, carefully sheathed. The hand makes pastoral calls on a prisoner. "Will you bring me sweet cakes, Stark, for my well-behaved tongue?" "I never had a tongue that behaved," he said. "I will bring you bread when the law says you must be fed, and water, and the decency due any highborn under guard." He did not move farther into the room, in part because her presence always turned distance into a form of self-respect. She tipped her head as if that answer amused, or offended, or both. "You speak of law now as if it were your husband," she said. "When last we played at truth, you held it like a mistress. You thought yourself very bold, coming to me with your little proof and your big northern honor. We almost saw where that got you." "We saw," he said. "And we see where we are now." He let his gaze shift past her, deliberately, to the slit of night. "The city sleeps better with fewer executions and more bread. So do I." "You will grow dull on bread," she said, "and fat on your sense of virtue. My father will come, and when he does, you'll discover that bread is not armor." "Your father knows the price of stones and the price of sacks," Ned said. "We are calculating both for him with care. He will come when his ledger tells him the trip is profitable. He will stay his hand when it tells him it is not." "Menarasti." She smiled, and in that moment, he remembered why men had once wanted to make songs of her. The smile could illuminate a room if the lamps all failed. "You think yourself very clever. Holding the city between a flint and a law." She said softly, "You forget the men with tinder. You forget that desire is the spark you cannot itemize." "I have forgotten nothing," he said, and it was true enough to wear. "We will try you in the sight of those whose sight matters. You will speak. Stannis will bring his law, and Tyrion his ink, and I will keep the doors open while men say their say. There will be no spikes. There will be no children cheered for by crowds that love to pretend they love princes." "Bancho. You never loved my son," she said, and some bright brittle thing in the tone made it sound almost like pleading worn thin. "You love your own in a way that makes you cruel to others. I loved your boy enough not to let men shape him into a weapon they could hate later and call fate," he said. He thought of Joffrey's face, the small set mouth that had learned to dramatize contempt before it learned to pity. "He will sleep without wine tonight. He is safer in prayer than he has ever been with soldiers. I will not speak to you as a father with a mother. That conversation will be too honest, and it will not help either of us. Eat, sleep. If you have a god, speak to it. If you don't, practice." She laughed then, a short, ugly break in the silk. "Practice. Yes. I have practiced every art a woman is permitted to practice in a world that likes women best when they are pleasant furniture. I am very skilled in the art that matters. Survival. Pray that your little tribunal and its little laws survive me." "No." He let the silence rest a moment. Then he nodded once to her and once to the guard, and the key turned, and the corridor took him back with the relief a sea gives a man when he leaves a rock. Sleep visited him as a bargeman does, briefly and with the scent of tar. The knock that woke him carried that same smell. And when he opened, Davos stood with rain on his shoulders and a folded letter in a leather wrap. "From SunSpear," he said, and Ned felt the small, involuntary easing of the chest that gratitude makes when it arrives sooner than dread. He broke Doran's seal. The Prince of Dorne wrote sparely, and with the sort of caution that reads in a northern house like a kinship of temperament. He thanked them for the trust, which he did not mistake. He spoke of Myrcella's poise, of the welcome afforded her, of the heat, of lemon water at noon, and of the fact that he would treat her, not as a hostage, but as a ward under a long promise. He did not promise anything he did not mean. He wrote that the little princess had asked if the sand always sang when the wind lifted it, and that he had told her it did not sing so much as speak, and that the words were old. He suggested, without saying it as a merchant might, that the old words of treaties were also pleasant to the tongue. Ned read it twice, then let Davos read it once. "She is safe," Ned said. "Safer. Davos said. And the man in SunSpear writes like he's already preparing to read this letter aloud, in a court that may judge him for each line. I don't mind that. Men who weigh words will weigh acts." "Damn." "Tyrion will have opinions," Ned said, and the corner of Davos' mouth flicked in the direction of humor. Tyrion did, when the letter was put upon the table with dates and a docket string. "Doran is a man who collects porcelain. He will not be the first to knock it over, but he will not forgive the man who does," he said. "We have traded immediate danger for distant leverage. I approve." "Your approval is not required," Stannis said, which, in his mouth, sounded almost like approval. "Renly will not approve anything. Catelyn said. She had the letter open again, as if turning it in light might reveal a new ink. He will call it a ploy, and he will be both right and wrong. Then we will let him be both paid and ignored, Tyrion said. The council resumes tomorrow. I suggest we post the prince's letter where men can read it, and also in places where men who cannot read will be told what it says by men who can, with the braggadocio reduced. Do so, Ned said. He looked at the names to the right of the day's business, the clumsy index they had adopted in lieu of a protocol that would be argued over for weeks. We have the Tyrell envoys in the afternoon. Before that, the matter of the grain weights and Lord Frey's petition. 7 save us from petitions, Tyrion murmured. I find myself missing the headings. They had fewer footnotes. Lord Walder Frey's parchment arrived before his people did. It was crowded with small, neat script, such as men write when they mean to imply that quantity and precision are moral qualities in themselves. The petition declared injury at the Crown's failure to send a royal acknowledgement of the twins' strategic importance in the present crisis, and offered, in exchange for such acknowledgement, a list of considerations that began with money and worked its way through marriages and ended with the improbable request that one of the royal party, by which Lord Walder meant anyone with a better name than his own, should pass through his bridge with sufficient ceremony to make the stone believe itself adored. Send him a paper, Stannis said, and reached for one. He may eat it for all I care. Send him a paper, Catelyn said quietly. That does not flatter him, but does flatter his people. Acknowledge the bridge and its use to the crown in perpetuity, and name the master of the crossing, warden of the Green Fork, not by right of blood but by grace of their maintenance. Give the bridge a title he can polish. He loves to polish. He loves to polish. Tyrion looked at her, bright. You know the man. I know the type, she said. And I know he keeps daughters who ought to have been treated better. We may not be able to right every small wrong on our way past, but we may step more carefully. Then, do it, Ned said. He watched Stannis' jaw move, not in disagreement but in that peculiar bruxism that meant the king was deciding whether a pragmatic humiliation counted against the law. The bridge will carry us, or someone, soon enough. Better it be our weight it knows first. Then, that afternoon in the smaller audience hall, with its cool green tiles and its windows, that admitted just enough river noise to remind men the city was not completely composed of itself, the Tyrell envoys came with the smell of a perfumer's glove. They wore green so cleverly that even Stannis' disdain could not find a seam. Sir Hobber Redwine spoke with plump courtesy, a cousin of Mace Tyrell, one of a generation of cousins, smiled and folded her fan when she wished to mean something, and snapped it open when she wished to mean something else. Behind them stood 2 septons who looked faintly apologetic for the good weather. They brought words of Renly's bravery, and Renly's charm, and Renly's suit. They brought a promise of ships. Not the Red Wine fleet itself, they were very careful to say, for Old Town had its own considerations. But ships from mannerly friends, from Shield Islands with their small tough men, from ports where Tyrell purses could encourage sails to appear as if by natural growth. They brought veiled threats and bouquets of praise, and a request for the council to relocate to a camp where the flowers did not smell of sewage. Catelyn did the work of answering, because her river calm discomposed them in a way Stannis' severity and Tyrion's jests never could. The law cannot walk, she said when they suggested decamping. It is a house. We are its furniture, and we do better to sit where men can find us. And one of the septons nodded despite himself, and looked as if he had betrayed his mother. When they left, Tyrion let his face fall into the nearest chair's shadow, and sighed up into it. They will come, he said. The Tyrells are not fools. They are vain men with excellent gardeners. They will plant themselves where they think the sun will be kindest. We must ensure we have the sun, Stannis said. I will not win by sense. You will win by the absence of stinks, Tyrion said. We are working on it. That night, a letter came from Harrenhal. The wax bore the Lannister lion so precisely that even the light caught in its mane looked expensive. Tyrion took it, broke it, and read it with a stillness that did not admit humor. When he handed it to Ned, the words were as blunt as iron. Tywin Lannister did not threaten, not in the way courtiers meant it. He described the world he preferred in the tone of a man ordering a room arranged. He would come when the council declared a lawful king. He would not come to watch a mummer's farce. He would have his daughter and the boy Joffrey delivered into his keeping, or he would take them. He would regard any trial that did not begin with Cersei's vindication as a stain meant to be scoured with men. He hoped, he wrote, that his son had not mistaken the limits of his talent for the borders of his duty. Tyrion rubbed a thumb along the crease of the parchment where he had folded it back. My father has never had a sense of humor about the parts of me that are smaller than his expectations, he said. I will answer him tomorrow with civility, a list of the laws we are obeying, and a poem. A poem, Stannis said, as if the word might be a tool found in a pile of useless metal. A poem about bridges, Tyrion said, bland. He does not like them, but he cannot deny their use. Write him with civility, Ned said, and with the truth. And attach the Prince of Dorne's letter. Men like your father wish to pretend that the realm consists of their house and the houses they hate. Remind him the map is more crowded than that. He slept badly again, not for lack of exhaustion, but because sleep is a citizen who reserves the right to be resentful. In those gaps, his mind went north in a manner that had nothing to do with maps, and everything to do with marrow. At Winterfell, the ravens brought letters and snowlarks brought their own opinions. Robb read his father's words, and then went to the yard with them in his pocket, and fought the air with a blunted sword, until the air persuaded him he would bruise. The Greyjohn laughed, then stopped when Robb did not. Theon Greyjoy watched with a pretended boredom that struck the forge of his pride for sparks. Maester Luwin, who had come to know how to leave boys alone without leaving them unattended, found him later in the Godswood, and offered counsel that smelled of old books and new bread. I want to ride, Robb said. I know, Luwin said, smoothing his robe as if it had done something to apologize for. You will ride when riding does not satisfy your temper at the cost of your house. Men will call you cautious. Let them. There are worse names. Theon thinks me a coward, Robb said, and the name came out like a pebble spat into a brook. Theon thinks what he thinks, Luwin said. He does not think as often as is good for him. He will discover that thought is a kind of courage later than you did. Send him to see Dragon Point with Sir Roderick to inspect the fishing. He will feel used and complain, and then begin to take pride. Sometimes boys need a weight they can lift in front of other men to learn the weight of their own name. Ben? Robb exhaled. The Godswood's leaves moved like a chorus that had been instructed to keep quiet. I will send him, he said. I will send more grain. I will send leather and wool. I will send a letter to White Harbor to thank them for the first ships, even before they have sent the second. And you will sleep, Luwin said. Or I will tell your mother you have not. Robb smiled then. Do not threaten me with my mother, he said. She would sail on a mill pond in winter to get here if you told her I was losing sleep. She is already away, Luwin said, soft. Pray for her under the weirwood. The heart trees in the Riverlands are cousins to ours. Perhaps they share rumors. At the wall, Jorah Mormont's bare growl grew more bare and less old man each day, when the Rangers came back with stories that did not have enough people in them. Jon learned the rhythm of absence, like the rhythm of breathing. Long, long. Short, long. Sam read from dusty annals about winters, when blizzards took whole men into their mouths and only spat out their names. Ghosts came and went, as if the spaces between trees were roads he knew by heart. Maester Aemon called Jon to the rookery one night and set a hand like paper on his wrist, while the old man's milky eyes seemed to search not the boy, but the air around him. There are letters from the south, Aemon said. And the word south seemed to hold not just warmth, but the memory of youth. They speak of law as if it were a warm robe, and of counsels as if men could be comforted by speaking. I prefer warm robes, Jon said. And Aemon's mouth smiled without showing teeth. So do I, he said. Law is the robe we put upon naked power to make it bearable. But sometimes, it is a robe put upon cold so keen, it refuses to regard the garment. I tell you this so that you will not be too comforted by news that sounds like summer. His hand found Joan's, and held it with a lightness that somehow steadied. Your father lives, he said, as if naming a star. Let that be as much comfort as it can be, and not more. Do your work. The North is proud of its sons when they are born. Jon bowed his head, because the truth spoken by a man who did not fear his own truths deserved that old courtesy. Yes, Maester. Send him my regards, Aemon said. I doubt he requires them. But men ought to share their kindness like a habit they will someday forget and must practice again. Back in King's Landing, the days did the tedious holy labor of making order look possible. Bywater's men learned to count without being told twice. The breadlines inched and did not riot. The dyer's quarter stank less violently because a drain was cleared that had been stopped before Jehari's. A troop of Riverland fiddlers played something merry that sounded like a song a man hums when he is required to be patient and insists upon calling it a choice. Sansa sat with Tommen in a small inner garden where a lemon tree took pain and made fruit, and taught him a northern game where you name a thing you can see that begins with a letter. And he laughed when he cheated, and she let him. Arya found Tobomat's yard by following the sound iron makes when it is persuaded to become a better form of itself. She watched a thick-armed boy hammer and did not speak. He looked up once, wiped his forehead with a wrist, and scowled in a way that announced he did not care if anyone watched. Arya took that as permission. Varys came oiled with tidings. Littlefinger's letters had multiplied like rats. Some of them had eaten each other. Renly was conducting councils beneath tents that held more cushions than chairs. The Queen of Thorns had called the whole arrangement a pantomime that presumes to be opera, and had then set cooks to making pies as if nothing about the music mattered. Pycelle had coughed in public and failed to convince anyone it was wisdom leaving his body. Ser Loras wore a new cloak that showed not a single grass stain, which told certain watchers that he was not spending as much time drilling men as surveying the angle at which banners fell. And then the storm came. It was not the kind of storm that breaks ships or men. It was the kind that sits on a city and instructs it in humility. Rain slanted and held, and slanted and held, for 3 days. The bay disappeared behind a veil, and the gulls learned to change their voices. Smiths cursed and went on hammering. Fishwives blessed the gods and cheated, and were forgiven. Tyrion grew thoughtful, and the lines beside Stannis' mouth deepened, which was the king's version of dancing. At the end of the second night, just before dawn tore a seam in the cloud, Davos came with a face like a man who does not wish to use the word omen and says, chart instead. A fisher 2 leagues below Massey's Hook saw sails, he said. Black on black. He could not be sure. The sea lies to men who want to be frightened. But he swore by the mother and by his own wife's temper. I value the second oath more. The Ironborn, Ned said. Davos said. Or some fool with poor taste in canvas. We've been telling the pilots where the shoals have shifted. We may need to tell them where the knives will come from. Send word to the galleys, Ned said. Tell Bywater he has leave to impress every river boatman with a back worth hitting, and to pay him a coin that will make him forgive the hit. Post watches at the mouth day and night. If there are sails, we will see them twice before they see us once. Ben? I'll go down myself, Davos said. If there are Ironborn, they'll like the look of the weather and think it favors men who know how to steal. Stannis' jaw worked. Greyjoy will test a crown before he crowns himself. He will find that the crown is iron on the inside. Better to let him find our nails than our throats, Tyrion said mildly. And send to the Hightower with a polite note that reminds them their beacon is admired. I do not want Old Town pretending it cannot see as far as it can when the sea is black. Man. Letters went, and men too. The storm took its time in ending, as is the right of any old thing that has been working. When the air finally went thin and clean, the city looked pale. News came up the Roserad like merchants in 2s and 3s. Renly's banners had doubled on the march. Lord Randall Tarley had rolled his men through rain as if each drop had knelt to let them pass. Lady Olenna had acquired a better tent. In the alleys near the Iron Gate, a pair of men had argued about kingship, until one had killed the other with a length of chain. The Watch hanged the survivor with the same length. Joffrey had tried to strike a Septon's acolyte, and had been told to sweep steps. He had swept 2 before sulking, and then returned awkwardly and swept the rest when he noticed that no one came to stop him or praise him. Tommen fed a cat, and was scratched, and did not cry, which fez proud noises out of the women who saw. Arya stole an apple, and then left a coin on the barrel, because the stealing had been the point, and she did not like conscience showing itself as a beggar later. The second sitting of the Great Council began with better weather and worse tempers. Men came in smelling of their camps, and announced their names as if they were anticipated. Renly had not yet entered the city. He sent men who were very careful not to kneel too soon. The High Septon proclaimed that the gods loved concord, which was a statement men will applaud until it inconveniences them. Stannis read from the book again. Tyrion flicked motes of dust that were not there off his sleeve and spoke with patience. Ned held the shape of the day in his head and tried to keep his face uninteresting. When, near sundown, a murmur ran the length of the hall and south through the door like a draft with a rumor inside it. Ned felt it before he saw what it foretold. Renly Baratheon came in dressed as summer would have dressed itself, with a cloak of green that told its own story, and a crown that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a painter's dream. Loras walked 3 paces back with an expression of fierce domesticity, as if he were shepherding the season. The Tyrell men in the hall brightened like mirrors catching sun. Stannis did not move. Tyrion's eyes lit with a private script. Catelyn looked at Renly and Ned watched in her face. A mother weighing a man against the boy he had once been, and finding both present and neither comfortable. Renly's bow was deep and generous, the sort of bow that announces a man has plenty more posture where that came from. "My lords," he said, in that voice that could coax stone to lean, "I have come to help the realm remember what joy feels like." "This is a hall for the law," Stannis said, "not for entertainments. The law is a feast when it is served as it ought to be," Renly said, unruffled. "We have all eaten too long at tables where the food tasted of fear and perfume." He spoke with ease. He spoke of the people. He spoke of the notice posted in the Street of Flower and how men had read it aloud to their wives. He spoke of the promise of no more severed heads above gates. He praised things he had not made, as if praising them could conscript them into his train. He did not mention that the law he praised named him an interloper. He did not name his brother king. He did not call Stannis brother at all. Catelyn rose once and asked whether a man who loved the realm would be content to be loved less than the law. Renly smiled and said a man who loved well would be content to be loved in any amount. Tyrion told a story about a man who tried to ride 2 horses and was respected by neither. Stannis spoke of oaths, which he treated as living beasts that require feeding. The High Septon blessed nothing in particular. Evening moved across the flags in the patterns men's shadows made. They adjourned because men have stomachs and wives and stubborn horses, and only so much rhetoric in their throats on a given day. After, in the antechamber where the narrow windows made the light a discipline, Catelyn spoke to Renly. He dismissed all but one man, and even Loras drew back to a corner where he could see and not hear. The words between them were not soft and not sharp. They were the words of 2 people who both imagined themselves to be trying to prevent a fire. "I have seen you since you were a boy," she said. "You like to be liked. The realm will like you until it needs you to be hard, and you cannot like that. Stannis can be hard, and he can be just. Let him be the thing you cannot, and be the thing he cannot." He took her hand and kissed it for the court to see, and for Catelyn alone said, very gently, "You mistake what I cannot be. I can be hard. I can be harder than any man in this hall if I am forced to throw my loveliness away. But I dislike that word, forced. It makes worse men than me brave. I prefer to be loved into being necessary." "Man, love will not mend the wall," Catelyn said, and the words fell between them as if someone had dropped a pail and water had scattered. He looked at her, and for an instant, the charm went out of his face like light out of a lantern when someone pinches the wick. "You speak of the cold," he said. "That is Stannis' song. He sings it for men who enjoy feeling superior to those who dance. I have stood in winter, that would peel the skin from your lips if you tried to smile at it. She said, I do not require songs. I require roofs. Be a roof or move out from between the men who would build one. Bendawai. Tai. He let go her hand as one releases a falcon in the knowledge it will circle back to the same glove. We shall see, he said, and the words were warm and meant nothing he would acknowledge tomorrow. The rumor of Ironborn sails turned into a thing Bywater could place a finger upon at dawn 2 days later, and the finger could point. A 3-oared raider with a sail furled low like a thief's hood had sounded the mouth of the Blackwater, like a man tapping a locked door to hear if anyone hid inside. Davos put a river galley in its path with such steadiness it looked like courtesy, until the moment the iron-hooked poles bit, and the boarding noises drowned the dawn's birds. 2 men died, and 7 were taken, and the rest went to the god their islands pretend to fear. The men taken spat and cursed in the Kraken's name, and had the sea still in their hair like old oil. Balin measures, Davos said, presenting the proof with an absence of triumph. He is a man who learned his mathematics the time he tried to add himself a crown, and found Stannis subtracting it for him. He will test until he has convinced himself he can count us. And send one alive to Dragonstone, Stannis said flatly. Let him tell his king what he told the Watch, that the mouth of the Blackwater bites. And the rest? Ned asked. 2 to the Watch, 3 to the oars for a year, 2 hanged within sight of the sea, Stannis said. The sea must see us answer. Tyrion looked at the captured men with a peculiar pity. I have more sympathy than I like to have for men who are poor at arithmetic, he said. Still, let the sums be written where all can read them. I will have the notices copied and posted in the fish market and the Street of Steel. Twice as many as the playbills for the jugglers who make me want to change cities. Menno. Renly sent a note that described the raid as piracy, which properly falls under the charge of kings who wish to be thought practical. Stannis sent him a copy of the dispositions and a small line noting that men who wish to be thought kings should be practical, which to Ned's ear was the closest Stannis had come to a joke since boyhood. The Queen of Thorns sent little cakes filled with almond paste to the kitchens, for the men who did not let the city be bitten, and a list of names to be thanked aloud by an easily swayed crowd. That afternoon, in the practice yard, Arya showed a watchman how to break a man's stance with a small step and a small blow, and the watchman laughed and called her Little Wolf, and promised to forget he had seen. Sansa laid in her trunk the warm things she could take north when the road was judged ready, and fingered the cloth of one southern dress with a small regretful thumb. Tommen brought her a kitten so furred it looked like a mistaken shadow, and asked if cats liked snow. She told him they liked the underside of stoves, and that snow was an underside of the sky, and he decided he liked the north because anyone who explained things so well must be explaining a place that would like him back. At dusk, Ned walked again above the bay and saw the first star put its shoulder to the sky. He thought of the men he had held together today, and of the men who held him together without knowing they did. Robb with his letters, Jon, a steady line in an old man's ledger, Bran's quiet patience, Little Rickon's howls, Catelyn's hand on a map. He thought of Cersei's laugh and Myrcella's yellow cloak on a deck, and of Davos' wet beard and Stannis' small sardonic almost smile, and Tyrion's eyes when he read his father's letter. He stood with the sense a roof has when it realizes it is kept up by beams it cannot see, and by men it will never properly thank. A bell rang in the distance. It was the cracked one, and its hair-thin fracture put a sorrow into the note that made even good tidings sound like a memory. Ned listened to it, counting, because counting was a way to insist upon order when the world preferred to be a crowd. The next morning, the small folks' voices rose before the bells did. On the street beyond the fish market, a painted board had been set upon a crate where yesterday a play had been advertised, and today the board said, in careful hand, "The law is a tool, not a weapon," and beneath it, "Bring your grievances to the hall on the second day, and they will be heard in the order in which you arrive." A man whose leg had not healed straight nodded, as if he had been waiting 40 years to read that. A woman who ground grain on a stone laughed and said she would bring her husband by the ear if need be. A boy traced the words with a forefinger and sounded them out. and afterward tasted a vowel on his tongue like a new fruit. In the hall, that second day, a farmer from the Kingswood told a story of soldiers using his boy's fish trap for targets. He told it plainly, without trying to be eloquent. Bywater stepped forward without being asked and named 2 men who would lose pay for a month and clean latrines with their own hands. And the farmer went away with an astonished respect that looked like someone had put a crown on his head and forgotten to tell him not to sell it. A dyer and a tanner argued about a ditch. Catelyn settled it with the sort of sense that recognizes that water runs downhill regardless of heraldry. A woman came and did not speak and showed bruises. Stannis rose before Ned did and called for the husband. And when the man tried to laugh in a way that meant he wished his courage impressed the crowd did not laugh, and Tyrion had him find an amount that meant he would feel the cost of his hand for a year. It was a morning in which nothing grand happened, and everyone who left felt the arrangement they lived under flex slightly, like a joint that had been stiff for too long and had been made to move with oil and attention. News from the Roserwad arrived in the afternoon like a self-important uncle at a wedding, loud, slightly damp, and likely to offend someone. Renly had sent a challenge, not naming it so but making it a challenge all the same. A trial by 7, his beauty made holy by number. He would bring knights and ask Stannis to bring knights and have the gods decide. There were murmurs in the camps already. Men like a spectacle they can call piety. No, Stannis said at once. Say yes, Tyrion said. Ned turned his head. Say yes, Tyrion repeated, enjoying his own audacity the way a tightrope walker enjoys calculating the width of a rope. And then make the conditions be the conditions of law. Let the trial by 7 be a show the council stages. Let the charges be listed and read. Let the champions be named from among men who represent the houses present. Let the High Septon bless nothing but the rules. Let Renly discover that even his games are improved by a referee. Down. Catelyn pinched the bridge of her nose. He will make a banner of it either way. He will, Tyrion said. We may as well choose the cloth. Stannis' mouth did that scarce movement again that suggested the possibility of entertainment in grim furniture. If I say yes, he said, it will not be because I believe the gods will sort out the succession like a list of debts. It will be because you have convinced me the show will buy us patience. Good, Tyrion said. We are in the business of buying patience. It is cheaper in the morning. Then, write the terms, Ned said. Make them good, make them fair. Make them speak the law so loudly that even men in tents will think they are listening to a priest. Tyrion bowed from the waist as if someone had put a stage behind him while he wasn't looking. With pleasure, he said. That evening, when the lamps in the Tower of the Hand made domes of light upon the table, and there were maps beneath them like skin seen through water, Ned wrote to Robb and to Maester Luwin and to Jon. He wrote to Doran with thanks. He wrote to White Harbor with a promise of grain to be returned in kind when ships came back with southern goods, because reciprocity is a language harbors speak. He wrote to Lord Frey with the language Catelyn had chosen, and to Lady Olenna with a line about pies that would either amuse or offend her, depending on which she preferred to be that day. He wrote to Tywin Lannister, and the ink seemed to thicken of its own accord as it ran into his name. He wrote long to Bran, in a hand that slowed to talk to a boy in Winterfell, who had once climbed too high and had become the teacher of patience to everyone around him. He described the Red Keep's walls as if they were hedges that a child could understand, the way they change color after rain, how the wind pretends at kindness with your hair and then yanks. He told him the city's dogs were sleek and the city's cats were too bold by half. He told him the law can be like a weirwood, old and not to be argued out of existence simply by wanting summer back. He did not mention Renly's cloak. When he set the quill aside, his hand shook a little from the labor. He pressed his thumb to the edge of the table until it stilled. He thought of the moment on the scaffold where the world had narrowed to a sword and a sound. And he thought of the world now, expanded again past the shape of a neck. The labor of keeping it that wide would not end. He did not require it to. Outside, the city performed the small noises that mean a city has decided upon sleep for a while. Footsteps grew less frequent and more meaningful. Laughter tucked itself into doorways. A last cart rattled badly toward the Street of Seeds and would rattle worse tomorrow. The bay breathed. The storm had washed a smell of fish scales and old wood into everything that could harbor a smell. The moon made its slow compromise with cloud. In the maiden vault, Cersei Lannister turned a page and did not read. In the sept, Joffrey slept like a boy who had spent a day trying not to be seen by anyone he wanted to impress. In a corner of the kitchens, Tommen's kitten found a place over a warm pipe and made a decision to love the north sight unseen. On a ship far to the south, Myrcella stood with lemon scent in her hair and listened for the sand to speak. On a wall of ice, Jon bent his head over a letter and let his breath make a ghost in the candlelight. In Winterfell, Robb put a finger upon a map and practiced not moving it until moving it would mean something better than satisfaction. Ned blew out his lamp and stood for a time in the dark, which is not the same as standing in ignorance. He let his eyes adjust until even darkness had texture. Somewhere, a bell took up again that hair-cracked music. He counted, not to end the number but to keep it company. When he lay down, sleep took him without quarrel. He had been fair to it in the day. Before dawn, the sky was the color of tin. Davos came again, not with alarm but with a weathered satisfaction. The raiders had been sent back to their black water. Stannis was already awake. Men who go to sleep with oaths under their tongues rise early to spit and breathe. Tyrion had fallen asleep on his ledger and woke with ink upon his cheek that made him look briefly like a man who had tried to fix his face and given up. Catelyn examined the terms Tyrion had drafted for the trial by 7 and crossed out a phrase and substituted a clearer one in the hand of a woman who has made lists for winter for more years than men had been paying attention. They ate together in that plain way that is possible for people who have not decided to kill one another before noon. Tyrion said something so dry about Pycelle's latest cough that even Stannis' shoulder made a movement like restrained mirth. Ned shared a slice of a northern sausage Sansa had reminded the kitchens how to spice and watched the men find it unfamiliar and dignified enough to enjoy. "Today we make a theater of the law," Tyrion said, rising with his cup, and not toasting anything. "Let us perform with conviction. Today we remind men that the law existed before we did," Stannis said. "Today we do not waste bread," Ned said. They went down into the morning with the particular steadiness of men who do not expect miracles and are prepared to be grateful when the world refrains from catastrophe. The hall waited. The city waited. Far north, cold waited, patient as a hunter who knows that prey will always return to the place where water is. They took up their places. The doors were opened. Men entered. Banners breathed a little. Words were arranged in mouths and loosed into the air, where they became the day's work. And beyond all of it, in a part of himself he had learned to keep for breath. Ned held one simple shape like a coal he would not let go cold. "We will go on." He did not dress the thought in finer garments. He did not need to. It warmed his hands. It made the law look less like stone and more like the roof it was meant to be. He bent his head a fraction, as men do before hefting a weight, and heaved. Ah. Pay. Call. Morning came thin and pale, as if the night had wrung it out. The air held that uncommitted coolness that belongs to days deciding themselves. In the smaller cloister behind the great hall, where a lemon tree confused itself into fruit, 2 or 3 times a year if servants remembered to tuck blankets at its roots on bad nights, the High Septon stood as still as a carved man and considered the page in his hands. He did not blink often. When he did, it was as if he were ensuring that sight remained a courtesy the gods extended to flesh. Tyrion waited beside a pillar, fiddling with the ribbon on a rolled copy of the terms he had written. Catelyn watched the Septon without watching, the way a woman watches a kettle that she has already decided will boil when it should. Ned stood with the easy stillness of a man accustomed to cold mornings spent listening to the complaint of wood before it remembers it is a door. At length, the High Septon lowered the page and folded it into the manner of his sleeves. "Trial by 7 is a sacred writ," he said, the ceremony in his voice relieved now and then by an old man's practicality. "It is not a market trick. It is not for deciding kings. The Andals, when they brought the 7, never presumed to put crowns into the hands of champions. They put a man's guilt there, not a realm's." "Then we are agreed," Stannis said. as if he had been standing there all along and not arrived with a quiet that made the lemon leaves still. "We are agreed to remind the realm," the Septon said, with a slight archness that acknowledged that reminders often have to be shouted when men pretend not to have ears. "You may make a show of your law, Lord Hand. You may not let a circus decide a lineage. We will perform reverence with proper scorn for idolatry," Tyrion murmured. "In the afternoon, before men get drunk on empty stomachs." "Before," Catelyn said. "Hungry men are more honest in their approval. They become less generous in their hatred as soon as they've eaten." Stannis' mouth flickered in what might have been agreement. "We will read the charges against the Queen before witnesses with names that matter," he said. "We will summon those who claim to have seen what they have seen. We will list what is speculation and what is fact. We will not lay hands upon a woman who is not yet judged." "Your restraint will do you credit," the High Septon said, and did not sound as if he expected to believe that sentence more tomorrow than today. They dispersed with purpose. In the corridor, Varys slid out of the wall like a rumor and offered a bow to the air. "How pious we look before breakfast," he cooed. "The gods must be delighted. Did they bless your paper, my lord?" "They blessed the parts written large," Tyrion said. "No one can say later that we whispered the law." "I do not recommend whispering it," Varys said. "Men prefer to hear their fates shouted. That way they can shout back." Bywater's men posted the terms everywhere. Men pressed their backs to walls and read aloud to each other. In the Street of Flour, a baker with a burned scar from thumb to wrist read the words and nodded as if at a loaf he had known by the smell before it came out of the oven. In the Hook, where the river speaks and men fail to, a pilot sounded out 7 like a man finding a familiar shoal after a storm had moved everything. In the Street of Silk, the girls took turns with a page and decided together that some words sounded less like jokes when put beside others in this particular order. The hall filled slowly, as halls do when men expect to be edified rather than entertained. Renly chose to attend. He came dressed as if his cloak were a banner meant to remind anyone tempted to forget. Lady Olenna did not come, which meant the Tyrells would remember her more fiercely. Stannis took his place with no adornment, and the same inexplicable power to make the candle near him seemed to stand a little straighter. Ned sat between them, the unremarkable stone of the table having learned his elbows and forgiven them. Cersei was brought with dignity and no fanfare. She wore white, whether as an appeal to the mother or an insult to everyone present. Ned could not decide, and only a little gold at her throat, which looked more dangerous on her than a dagger would on other women. Joffrey had been told he could not attend. Tommen sat beside Sansa, in a bench where good seats are granted to children, so they will learn without being encouraged to perform what they learn. Pylos read. He did not perform the charges. He curated them, like a careful clerk arranging facts in a corridor where men could not help bumping their shoulders upon each in turn. The hearing was not a trial. It was the prelude to one, the sort of prelude that turns a simple melody into something hard to counterfeit later. Stannis insisted on enumerations. Catelyn insisted on plain speech. Tyrion insisted on margins where notes could be made that looked like jokes until they turned out to be necessary. Ned saw Cersei listening. She listened as a hunter listens to a strange animal in old brush. When they adjourned, nothing decisive had happened. A city held its breath in an organized fashion. That was all. Men went away with the sensation that they were participating in something larger than their pride, which is a sensation that lasts a day at most. After, in the cool place near the window where old maps healed in the shade, Ser Barristan Selmy came to Ned with the air of a man who has made up his mind to do a thing and dislikes the inevitable awkwardness of the doing. He still wore white, because he understood that men need colors to stand in for ideas, but his hair had the stiffer dignity of a man who has cut it himself, because barbers are a type of luxury unwise to cultivate during a change. "Lord Stark," he said, "I would like it known that I am at the king's service." Ned looked at him and saw an old blade in an honest sheath. "It is known." "Known," Barristan said, with a gentleness that made the word a rebuke to the realm, "is a thing men say to excuse their failure to make use of truths." "Then we will make use," Ned said. "I have a need for a man who knows the city's martial corners by their true names and not by what courtiers call them." I have a need for a man who can teach certain boys to put down a sword once they have picked it up." "Which boys?" Barristan asked, as he already knew. "The one in the sept," Ned said. "And others who will one day wish to make themselves kings in gardens. If we can teach them to respect weight, we may keep them from mistaking law for a weapon." "And now?" Barristan nodded. "I will go to the sept this afternoon. I will ask permission." "Ask the High Septon," Ned said. "He will refuse. Then he will think. Then he will accept. And he will tell himself a story about magnanimity. It is best to let him keep it." Barristan's mouth made a shape that perhaps, in another man, would have been a smile. "You have learned some of our southern games," he said. "I have learned to call roofs roofs," Ned said. "Even when it displeases the men who sell the shingles." Barristan bowed with an economy the sword understands and departed in a rustle that recalled old banners. When he was gone, Tyrion slid into the place he'd left, as if the chair had been warmed for him. "Barristan has the look of a man who keeps the ledger of his soul in a tidy hand," Tyrion said. "I admire and distrust such men in equal measure." "You distrust everyone in equal measure," Ned said. "Not everyone," Tyrion said with disarming candor. "There are people I distrust in different colors. Your distrust, for instance, has a northern blue to it. It is a pleasant sky to walk under so long as one remembers it has winter folded inside it." "Stop flattering me and tell me what you want," Ned said, because it was quicker. "I want to send Beric Dondarrion with a good small company into the Riverlands," Tyrion said, the words sliding out like a card from a sleeve. "News from the trident smells of Lannister armor and the mountain's appetites. Your writ sent him once. Send him again. Do it with the seal of this new arrangement. Men are already naming for us, without asking our permission. Make a spectacle of justice moving outward. And," he added, as if this were a small garnish, "let Thoros of Myr ride with him. The small folk love a red robe when it smells of wine and not of zeal." Ned thought of the first time he had signed Beric's commission, and the way the city had pretended that justice at the far end of a river is the same as justice before lunch. "Do it," he said. "Give him a letter for Lord Tully. Name him, not just to bring the mountain to heel, but to protect the small folk as if their lives were silk and the law the hand that keeps the cloth from fraying." "Your similes improve with office," Tyrion said, pleased. "We will draft it at once." That afternoon the yard found a new kind of order. Sir Barristan stood with his sword held in an angle that says, "We are here to practice courtesy," and waited for the High Septon to approach. Joffrey stood behind the old man with a face composed into something that tried to be princely and had been overtaken by boy. When Barristan bowed, the Septon inclined his head. Then he stepped aside as a man might step aside to see if another can pick up the weight he has been boasting about lifting. "I will show you how to hold a blade," Barristan said to Joffrey in a voice that did not flatter and did not condescend, "and how to set it down. The second is the harder." Joffrey's hands trembled with the effort it takes to do a thing when everyone is historically arranged to see you fail. Barristan did not look at the hands. He corrected a wrist. He corrected a stance. Joffrey glared as if outrage could take a rib out of time and make the hour go back. Sansa watched from a distance with the strange twin expressions she had learned in this city. Hope and grief practiced together, so that neither would be surprised at its companion. Arya too watched, because she watched all things that involved swords. She watched without forgiveness and without cruelty. Tommen tried to imitate a foot position and nearly fell over the kitten that had decided his ankle was a toy. He picked it up with a confused dignity and put it on a bench, where it looked offended and went to sleep. By evening, the talk in the city had settled into the grooves that belonged to serious things. Men did not declare victory on corners. They counted how many steps they had taken along a road they had thought would be shorter. In a scribe's shop off the Street of Sisters, two men argued over a borrowed copy of Septon Barth's old opinion on trials by combat. And a boy with ink on his nose fell in love with the way words could outlast swords. In a wine sink off the river row, a pair of pilots played at stones and spoke of how the Blackwater had shifted 2 finger widths this year, and whose fault that was. In the shadow of the dragon pit, a mummer practiced his bow, until it ceased to be mocking and looked like respect. On the second morning after the hearing, a caravan reached the city from the east, with a train of pack mules that looked as if they had walked around the world and were disappointed by what they found. Among the goods was a chest bound in iron, whose owner guarded it with a piety that suggested prayer. He told the gate guard that it had come from Qohor, through Pentos and Myr, that the men who had sold it remembered the name Valerian as a thing you felt first in your teeth. Tabomat came himself to look. He ran his finger along the seam and said, with the yearning of a true craftsman, "Chain." Tyrion, when told, looked up from a list of timber and smiled as a man smiles when a nudge from the world agrees with a whisper already in his head. "Chain," he said with satisfaction. "It seems the gods intend us to be unwelcoming to unwelcome ships." It went quickly after that by the standards of making large things that men then pretend appeared on their own. Tabos forge took on the smell of hot iron and oil and the sort of purpose that makes men forget to drink before their tongues stick. Blacksmiths called in boys who'd thought themselves too clever to pound metal and taught them, again the honor of repetition. A crew downriver laid pilings in mud, soft enough to remember any insult for a year. In secret as anything done by 100 men can be, they began to string an iron throat across the Blackwater's mouth, one link at a time, a promise they would not be required to fulfill unless the world remembered to be ugly. Davos went on the water twice a day, not because he did not trust other men's eyes, but because he could not abide the thought of a thing missing him that he could have seen. At night he sat with a ledger and taught himself to love numbers the way a poor boy learns to love a stern father. He found, to his surprise, that he did not hate them. They were plain men, numbers, and they did not lie unless someone made them. He began to admire the city in the way a sailor admires a ship he will never own but is allowed to keep from sinking. On the Roserad, Renly's camp expanded like a story that had begun simple and discovered an audience. Brienne walked the perimeter at dawn and at dusk with an attention more faithful than prayer. She ignored men who looked at her because men were not the thing she had sworn to, and it did not improve them to learn otherwise. Loras fussed at the angle of banners and the training of horses, and took the measure of others, pried the way practiced men take measure of cloth. Lady Olenna had tea without sugar and pronounced it excellent because it was not sweet. When word came that the council had refused the trial by 7 as a means of deciding the crown, Renly shrugged with such perfect grace that half his captains thought he had planned the refusal as a manner of giving his generosity something to be squandered upon. He sent back a message that praised the council's piety and indicted its caution, and declared himself ready to enter the city to speak further. He did not enter the city. He set his tents nearer to the Roserad in such a way that women riding out from King's Landing to see the spectacle could get dust on their skirts and laughter on their lips and feel they had participated. Catelyn rode out to him with a small company that looked larger because men in the city had become used to counting their companions by the quality of their leather rather than their number. In Renly's pavilion, which did its best to look as if a garden had been convinced to behave like a roof, she spoke slowly and did not raise her voice, and did not permit herself to admire the cheekbones of anyone's argument. "You will not get what you want by being pleasant," she said to Renly at last, when the aftertaste of compliments had grown tiresome. "And yet," Renly said, with a sweetness that felt close to spite, "you would not get what you want by disapproving of me either. We are in a bind, Lady Stark. I have found myself quite good at those. Men noir. Be good at accepting what must be accepted," she said. "Give the law time to make a shape you can inhabit without having to pretend." He considered her. "Do you love your husband?" he asked suddenly, as if surprised to hear the words in his own mouth. "Yes," she said without a heartbeat between question and answer. "Then I will tell you a truth," he said. "I do not love my brother. I do not hate him either. He is like winter. One does not love it or hate it. One survives it. I would prefer to be spring. And now, spring is the season that most flatters itself," she said. Sanding? It takes credit for work that winter built, and is an excuse for dances. men do not deserve." She inclined her head and left him with Loras, pretending not to listen, and Brienne pretending not to watch, and the smell of good bread that Renly had brought into his pavilion as a sort of argument. Back in the city, Varys came at twilight with a face that would have looked like concern on any other man's head. "The lady in the Maiden Vault has written a poem," he said delicately. "Cersei writes?" Tyrion said, intrigued. "She does many things without witnesses," Varys said. "The poem was delivered to a laundress, who delivered it to a boy, who delivered it to a soldier, who did not deliver it to Littlefinger because Jacelyn Bywater has put men in between such men now. The poem is not very good, but it contains a key for a lock in a cellar where Casterly gold waits in discreet ingots. A guard could be purchased. A door could be opened." "Has it?" Ned asked. "No," Varys said, "because the guard's wife is sick, and he went home early today." He smiled, just a little, as if to acknowledge that the world is stranger and kinder than anyone remembers to expect. "But there will be other poems." "Move her rooms," Stannis said. "Twice," Tyrion said. "And change the locks. And change the men. And pretend to be flattered that she has chosen a verse form appropriate to her station." "She will try again," Catelyn said. "She will," Varys agreed. "I tell you this because it would be inconvenient to have to tell Lord Tywin that his daughter slipped a lock with a sonnet." They moved her, and the guard's wife recovered. And in Flea Bottom, a boy recited 3 lines of Cersei's bad poetry to a girl who laughed so helplessly they fell into a gutter and kissed, and afterwards both happier about the law. Beric Dondarrion rode out in clean mail, and a light that made him look younger than men, with scars, thought they had a right to look. Thoros of Myr went with him, his red robe flapping in a fashion that made girls laugh and old men mutter. Ned stood to watch them go, and did not think of whether they would come back. Thinking of returns tempts the gods into being theatrical. He thought instead of the writ that sent them, and the paper that would remain if they did not. The Ironborn did not come back to test the chain at once, which is to say they were intelligent enough to be cautious and proud enough to tell themselves caution was the same as patience. In their absence, the Bay learned this new secret quietly. A heron landed upon a pilaster like a clerk choosing a stool. A boy fell off a plank and discovered that one can be grateful for iron the eye cannot see. Davos charted soundings and taught pilots, who had once sworn they would never trust a man without salt in his beard, to trust what numbers told them about their own river. Letters pooled in the hand's chamber like fish in a shaded eddy. From White Harbor, wool and grain and men willing to man oars if oars were needed. From Gulltown, a continuance of ships if the Vale's scuffles did not grow teeth. From the twins, Lord Walder's agreement to the title Catelyn had suggested, written in a cramped hand that needed to confirm 100 times that the line acknowledging his bridge did not give him a thing the law could then take away. From SunSpear, a small lemon pressed into the linen wrapping as if to make the page smell of promise. From Harrenhal, silence, which is a letter written in Tywin's favorite ink. Ned wrote at night when the city's noise dulled into something like a large animal breathing. He wrote to Bran about barristers and barracks, and discovered he had to define both to make them equal in the boy's head. He wrote to Jon about barrack and old writs and new ones, and the way men become symbols, whether they say yes to that job or not. He wrote to Robb less as a lord, and more as a man who had once wished to snatch a sword simply to feel it, and told him that this desire passes if one works it to exhaustion without indulging it. He wrote to Catelyn across the room, which sounds futile, until one remembers that marriages are a geography, and some truths go further in ink. The third sitting of the Great Council saw less spectacle and more procedures, which means, in a city, that power had grown tired. Men who had shouted earlier in the month discovered they preferred to be home for supper. The Tyrell sent clever men with quiet voices, who did not praise anyone where others could hear, and whose polite nods arranged better than banners. The Stormlords who had held Renly's cloak learned which stones in the Red Keep were not worth banging heads against. Stannis let Pylos speak sometimes, which gave the chamber the air of a school that had at last decided to give dull diligence a chance. Afterwards, Tyrion walked with Lady Olenna on the terrace, where the kitchen fumes are tamed into honest smells. He liked the old woman because she did not pretend to like him. You are an unpleasant necessity, she said, peering down at the river. I aspire to be a pleasant necessity, he said. But I am content to be necessary. She flicked him a glance that measured his honesty and found it sufficient. You will hang if this goes badly, she observed, as if stating a general theorem. So will many men taller than I, Tyrion said. The advantage of my stature is that I will have a shorter fall, and perhaps be able to lift a little more weight from underneath without being noticed. You flatter yourself when you are not flattering others, she said. That is a vice I tolerate in men who can make sums. Your king, if we must call him that for lack of a less rhetorical term, has the cold nose of a hound and the warmth of a stone. Your hand is a northerner who thinks roofs are inventions. Neither will save the city alone. Nan, I know, Tyrion said. But both may keep it from deciding to starve in order to keep its pride. See that they do, she said, and rapped his cane with her fan to make a point he had already accepted. And give the small folk something to thank you for. That is not bread. Bread makes them grateful for a day. A law makes them grateful for a season. A story makes them grateful for a generation. We are not in the business of stories, Tyrion said. You are always in that business, she said. You simply prefer to let other men pretend to write them. Send my regards to your king. Tell him I prefer my justice hot, not tepid. He can warm it by frowning more effectively. Nah. At the wall, Jon read the barrack writ, copied out by a young man who admired the shape of letters more than their content. And he felt the strange push and pull in his chest again. Pride that justice could walk, fear that it would be outpaced by men who ran. Jeor Mormont declared that the Rangers needed shoes and sent a letter he signed like a man hammering a nail to a door. Sam wrote a page of observations about Snow that read like love and embarrassed him. Ghost brought back a scent that made Jon think of old bones under new cold. When he stood nights on the walkway and looked north, he thought of antlers made of ice and told himself that the mind uses pictures when it is afraid of names. At Winterfell, Theon took Sir Roderick's instruction with a grin, and then with a pout, and then with a craftsman's attention that surprised them both. He found that fish smell stays in the skin of a man long after a bath, and that boats have opinions about how they are handled and express them without courtesy. He wrote a short letter to Pike and did not send it. He stood on a promontory where wind has its own laws and looked west, and told himself that he knew better than his father how to be a man. He did not. He would learn. Catelyn returned from Renly's camp with a dust of polite refusals and the knowledge that charm is a kind of currency that spends quickly in crises. In the yard, she watched Arya spar with a boy whose name belonged to a minor house and whose mother wanted the boy kept out of real danger, and did not understand that Arya had become real danger for boys who presumed her a lesson. In the hall, she sat with Sansa and taught her how to fold letters with importance in them, so that the folded thing looks like a promise and not an apology. In the small council chamber, she and Stannis argued once about precedence, and Stannis surprised them both by yielding because her sense was better. Do not make a habit of that, Tyrion said afterwards, amused. I will make a habit of being obeyed when I am right, Stannis said. It will save me time. And friends, Tyrion suggested. I have men, Stannis said. I have no use for friends. Everyone has use for friends, Tyrion said. They are the only people who forgive us when we are clever at the wrong time. The days made a rhythm. Letters in the morning, hearings in the noon, bread counted at dusk. Bywater's men found 3 stolen sacks in a stable that had no horses, and a priest who had somehow owned more wine than God. Pycelle retired with a cough so pointed it could direct traffic, and failed to convince the Tri-Council that balking at signatures made him a sage. Varys reported that the 7 statues in the Great Sept had been dusted more frequently of late, which is a way the faithful prepare themselves for outcomes they cannot influence. Davos reported that the shoals had steadied into their new places, which is a way a river forgives men for touching it. Then a raven came from the Trident with a strip of parchment that smelled of damp and haste. Men burned in the riverlands. The mountain had ridden with his men as a storm rides, with no preference for what he broke. A village had been left with a new geometry. Fewer walls, more ash, and a boy with his hands tied had been found hanging from a low branch, as if to teach other boys not to grow. Beric had gone there and was not found. Thoros had been seen weeping like a drunk without wine. The letter named places where smoke still insisted upon itself. It suggested that the law would have to ride faster. "We cannot ride the law to every fire," Stannis said. "We can make truth of it in enough places that men begin to fear breaking it. We can also quietly send more men," Ned said. "Not with banners. With bread and water and surgeons and a priest who knows how to speak to grief as if it were not a sinner." "Oh, I will write to Blackhaven," Catelyn said. "Beric's absence will need to be filled by men who understand that absence is an office in itself." "I will write to my father," Tyrion said. "I will tell him what we know, and I will ask him, as a son asks a father, not as a supplicant begs a lord, to call his dog to heel." "He will not," Stannis said. "I know," Tyrion said. "But he must be given the chance to put his name to that refusal." He wrote. He wrote better than a son writes to a father after a quarrel. He wrote as a clerk writes to a patron who must be persuaded that he can have more influence by appearing to have less. He enumerated wrongs. He enumerated remedies. He did not accuse, he exposed. He did not beg, he insisted. He signed with sufficient flourish to please a man who appreciates the forms of things more than their content. Tywin's answer, when it came, could have been written by a mountain if mountains used ink. He regretted, he said, that the Tri-Council insisted upon misunderstanding the necessary roughness of war. He regretted that outlaws in his vicinity seemed to prefer attacking his supply lines and then calling themselves victims. He regretted that the current rulers of the capital seemed more interested in letters than in victory. He did not regret the mountain. He did not know what a regret of that size would look like and did not care to learn. Tyrion read this aloud with such poise that for a moment it sounded like a decent man's apology. Then he set the paper down and said, very quietly, "He will not stop. We will have to make him stop with a thing he respects. He respects loss. And we will have to make him pay," Catelyn said. And there was no drama in it, only housekeeping. The Great Council reached its fourth sitting and found itself resembling a mill. Grain in, flour out, no applause. Pylus read precedents as if it were a good recipe. The High Septon prayed as if addressing the gods and the gods' clerks separately. Renly smiled and managed to look generous while counting his own reflections in polished plates. Stannis spoke when the law called, and when he did his words did not so much fill the room as leave an impression on its walls. Ned held the center as a man holds a beam while other men drive pegs. On the evening of the 4th, Tyrion returned from the fish market with fish on his breath, and triumph disguised as thoroughness. "There is a man in Flea Bottom who carves whistles that sound like birds," he said. "There is also a woman who has devised a way to count loaves without learning numbers. She puts a thread through each loaf, and there are as many colors of thread as there are hours in the day. If the colors do not match the hour, she knows someone has stolen. She calls it her tangle. She is willing to come to the granaries and tangle for us." "And now?" "Hire her," Ned said at once. "Pay her enough that men resent it and then accept it because the bread has stopped walking away. We are building an empire upon string," Stannis muttered. "Better that than upon supposition," Tyrion said. "String can be cut and retied. Supposition ends with men timid where they ought to be brave and brave where they ought to be cautious." Cersei's second poem never left her hand. She tore it up when the guard's wife came to the door with news about a cousin who had been knocked by a cart and proved that luck does not wait for poems. She began to watch the girls who cleaned her copper basin instead, and found that one looked at her without loathing. She began to speak to that one in the manner of a woman teaching another woman how to live among men without becoming one of their stories. In Dorne, Myrcella learned to walk in sandals without scuffing, and that lemon water tastes best at mid-morning. Arianne Martell taught her a game in which one draws lines that ought not to cross, and then permits them to do so elegantly. and told her without cruelty that being a woman in the south is not so different from being a woman in the north. It is merely hotter and has better fruit. Arya watched and remembered names. Doran Martell sat at a window and let the water gardens do their work upon his temper. When he rode again to the capital, he sent not only a letter but a quill cut the way they cut them in Dorne, with a narrower nib. Pylos tried it and discovered his hand improved. At night, Ned dreamed once more of snow that is not weather. He dreamed of a line of men not moving because the cold had told them not to. He woke with a small crack of pain in his fingers and a desire to hold something warm. He found in the dark the thought he had come to use as a coal. We will go on. He did not ornament it. He put the day's plan through it as one threads beads, and the plan hung better for the string. On the morning set for the ceremonial reading of Renly's submission to the law's forms, a document that said nothing truly binding and everything symbolically necessary, the city woke with an appetite and did not riot. Renly came in dressed in virtue. The words were read. He did not quarrel with them. When Stannis spoke, he called him brother, with a sound that made some men believe for a moment that the word belonged in mouths again. Two men in the back argued about the precedence of antlers over stags on banners. A woman in the gallery cried quietly for a husband lost to last year's cruelties, and could not stop because the noise reminded her that tears are permitted again. It ended with a low, rolling murmur that is the only applause the law deserves. Men went to eat. The watch changed shifts without hitting anyone. The bay lay down and pretended to be simple. Bywater came at noon with a face that suggested a snag in a net that could still be mended. A purse turned up in the street of silk, he said. Gold in it. Lannister mint. Dropped as if in haste. Found by a girl who understands that such things bring more trouble than generosity. She brought it to us. We found a man 2 corners away who appeared to be very angry at losing nothing at all. No. Who? Ned asked. An associate of Lord Petter's associate, Bywater said. Perhaps the Lord wishes to remind us that he exists. Perhaps the Lord wishes to find out how our hands move when we are not thinking about them. Either way, he has learned that his hands are noticed. Return him his money, Tyrion said, with a note that reads, "We have found your purse and returned it so that you will not be tempted to make us notice you again." Men do not like being called petty thieves in complex sentences. Bywater's mouth made a small, painful shape that might have been an attempt not to enjoy himself. "Yes, my lord." In the afternoon, Stannis permitted himself to stand upon the wall of the Red Keep and look east as if he disliked that direction personally and wished to survey it for further reasons to dislike it. Davos joined him and did not attempt to make the view sociable. After a time, Stannis said, almost conversationally, "You once smuggled onions into a castle." "I did," Davos said. "It was not my onion that saved us. It was the men inside, choosing not to make a riot with their hunger." "Men do not choose," Stannis said. "They learn. Or they are made. This city is learning." Davos said. "And we are making." He pointed with the blunt politeness of a sailor at the line no eye could see. "When the chain bites the water, the river will make a noise. You will hear it and think it is a mistake. It will not be. It will be the sound of men not dying." "No." "Good," Stannis said, and the word carried more warmth than any word he had used that week. That night, a courier slid into the city from the King's Road, with a horse that had opinions about his diet, and a face that had opinions about sleep. He brought a letter with a blue ribbon punched through by a wolf's head. Robb had written with the steadiness of a boy who had been instructed at an early age that ink is as much a weapon as iron. "Father." The letter said, "There are men here who would ride if I let them ride. I have let them walk instead. I send you leather, wool, and patience. Theon has gone to see Dragon Point and writes less than he speaks, which is a change I approve. Bran has confused Maester Luwin by asking whether law is a tree or a tool. I told him you say it is a roof. He says a roof must have posts. He says he will find me posts when he is old enough to walk farther than the gods would. I send you this news because you told me once that a man cannot eat only his worries. I eat mother's bread and think of winter. I am doing as you asked. Your son, Robb. Ned read it twice, and let the second reading do the work of sleep upon his blood. He imagined Bran, under the heart tree, arguing with history as if it would listen to a boy with a keen tongue. He imagined Robb telling men to walk. He imagined Theon in a boat, discovering that water remembers what iron forgets. He stood and went to the window and let the city's little late noises press on him, the way rain does not always announce itself. He did not know, could not know, which of the arrangements they had made would take and which would fall apart when weather and men went to their old habits. He knew only the feeling in his hands when he set them beneath a weight and lifted, and the way the muscles learned. He knew only the faces he had promised bread to, and the children learning to say a word that was not fear. He knew the taste of lemon on a letter, and the sound a chain makes when it is forged in a city that has decided not to die that winter. He slept and did not dream. In the morning, bells rang like practice, and men went to work as if the law were a thing their hands could keep warm by moving. The river held its secret patiently. The north smelted its iron for other roofs. The wall breathed out. In the riverlands, a lord with a flaming sword died in a ditch, and then later did not. In SunSpear, a girl measured sand with her feet, and learned that south and north are not opposite so much as two versions of the same problem. How to keep your people alive when men insist upon being themselves. On the fifth day, as if to remind everyone that patience is a luxury, another courier came, this one with dust in his mouth and fear in his eyes. He carried a letter with broken edges that suggested it had been folded and unfolded by hands that wanted to strangle paper. It smelled of smoke. It spoke of the Gold Road and a band of men with lions on their helms, and a field where half-grown barley had been crushed into mud. It named the mountain again and again and again. It named a girl found in a burned house who had not learned yet to cry again because shock had taken even that from her. Ned set the letter down as a man sets down a hot iron and does not tell himself it did not burn him. "Call the council," he said. "Send to the Septi for the High Septon. Send to Renly's camp to inform him that letters are being read in a hall where men are permitted to listen without banners. Send to the guilds that we will hear their petitions tomorrow anyway. Bread will be counted. Law will be read. We will not let a fire set upon a field teach us how to feed this city." And now, he felt Tyrion looking at him, weighing him with interest untainted by malice. "You are not elegant," Tyrion said softly. "No," Ned said. "I am not." "It suits you," Tyrion said. "And the city. Elegance is for endings. We are in the middle." And now. They went back into the hall and set the day upon its tracks again. They read. They signed. They declined to cheer. Renly glowed and then dimmed and then, for a moment, forgot to glow at all when a woman from the Street of the Sisters stood with her child and told a story about soldiers who had chosen not to make a bad day worse. Stannis frowned and then stopped frowning. Not because he had become pleased, but because his face had understood that sorrow deserves the dignity of an unadorned expression. Catelyn took a petition about water and made a solution that would humiliate no man and yet leave none too proud. Bywater named a guard and made an example that did not delight him. Varys watched like a scribe living inside a hive. It was not enough. It would never be enough. That is the secret of law. It does not finish. It abides. It requires men to keep showing up, to keep reading, to keep teaching the boy with ink on his nose to love letters, and the girl with bruises to show them in halls, where men must look and call the marks by their names. It requires a chain to go link by link across a mouth that prefers to swallow. At sunset, the bay went hammered bronze. Davos' skiff cut a line across it like a word drawn upon a page too carefully for anyone to mistake. Stannis stood on the wall again with his hand upon the stone, and for a moment he closed his eyes and let the city's breath pass through him. Tyrion sat on a parapet not far off, his heels drumming a private beat against ancient brick, and thought about bridges and poems and fathers and sons, and how sometimes an insult properly phrased can be more merciful than the wrong praise. Catelyn, in a quiet place, unrolled a little map. Robb had drawn for Bran and smiled at the way a boy makes proportions truthful with affection. Sansa fed Tommen's cat a shred of fish and told it a story about snow. Arya lay on her back on a flat roof and held needle above her face until the blade trembled, and then steadied, and felt that steadiness move into her wrist and down into the place where patience is made. Ned, in the hand's chamber, lifted the next letter. He did not look for omens. He held it to the light, as a man does with a thing he respects, and set his eyes to the lines. The candle made a circle on the table. The circle held. He read. He reached for the next page. He did not finish. He went on.